There is a real island in the Pacific Ocean, a curved ring of coral in the Marshall Islands, and between 1946 and 1958, the United States detonated 23 nuclear weapons on it, and above it and beneath its lagoon. The island is called Bikini Atoll, and decades later, a marine biologist turned cartoonist set a small yellow show at the bottom of that same ocean and called the town Bikini Bottom. And almost nobody watching as a child ever stopped to connect those two facts. Tonight, we are going through all of it. The theories, the coincidences, the things a writer half admitted, and the things the show has never once come out and denied. So get comfortable, turn the lights down low, let your shoulders drop, and if you have not subscribed to Krabby yet, it genuinely does help us keep making these long, quiet ones for you. We will be here a while. Let me start with the water itself, because before there is a single theory about talking sponges and secret formulas and hidden episodes, there is a real place, and the real place is stranger and sadder than most of the fiction built on top of it. Bikini Atoll sits in the northern Marshall Islands, out in the central Pacific, a ring of about 23 small islands wrapped around a wide blue lagoon. For most of human history, it was simply home. People lived there, fished there, raised families there across generations, and the water around the reef was some of the clearest and most alive water anywhere on Earth. Then came the middle of the 20th century, and the end of one enormous war and the anxious beginning of a long, cold one. And the United States went looking for somewhere remote enough to test the most powerful weapons anyone had ever built. Bikini was chosen partly because it was far from shipping lanes, far from large populations, and because its lagoon was the right size and shape to anchor a fleet of target ships. The people who lived there, the Bikinians, were asked to leave. They were told it was temporary, that it was for the good of mankind and to end all world wars. They agreed, and they were moved off their own islands. And the great irony that hangs over the whole story is that for many of them, the leaving was never temporary at all. Generations later, their descendants still could not simply go home. What happened next is the part that turns a geography lesson into something that sits in your chest. Starting in 1946, with a program called Operation Crossroads, the United States began detonating atomic weapons at Bikini. Over the following 12 years, the number climbed, test after test, until 23 nuclear devices had been set off in and around that one small atoll. Some were dropped, some were fired from ships, some were suspended, and at least one was detonated underwater in the lagoon, throwing up a column of radioactive spray and a dome of water that collapsed back into a churning white cloud. And here is the detail that connects straight to a cartoon you probably first watched before you were 10 years old. When a nuclear device goes off underwater, the shape it makes is not the neat vertical mushroom you picture from the desert tests. It is a strange broad column, a wide spreading base, an unnatural bloom of water and vapor rising off a flat blue surface. If you have ever watched an old piece of footage of the Baker test at Bikini, that image of the sea itself standing up into a tower, it does not leave you. The largest nuclear detonation the United States ever set off happened right here, at Bikini itself. A hydrogen bomb test in the middle of the 1950s that dwarfed the weapons used at the end of the Second World War. The blasts vaporized entire small islands. They fused sand into glass. They spread fallout across the region in ways the planners underestimated badly, drifting radiation onto inhabited atolls and onto a Japanese fishing boat whose crew fell ill, an incident that became international news and helped turn global opinion against open-air nuclear testing in the first place. The lagoon at Bikini, that clear alive water, became one of the best-studied contaminated environments on the planet. And then the strangest, quietest thing happened underneath it all. The reef did not die the way you would expect. In the decades after the tests, when scientists returned to the sunken ships and the blast craters, they found coral growing again, huge stands of it, some of it enormous, thriving in a place that had absorbed 23 nuclear explosions. Divers described swimming through a drowned fleet of warships now carpeted in coral and circled by sharks and fish, life reclaiming a graveyard of the deadliest machines ever built. The land above the water stayed dangerous. The soil held onto its radiation. The people still could not safely move back and eat what grew there. But the sea kept going, and something about that image, a ruined surface world and a lagoon full of impossible thriving life just below it, sits under this entire show whether the series ever meant it to or not. I want to be honest with you about why I am starting here, because none of what I just told you is a theory. It is history. You can look up every piece of it. And that is exactly what makes the SpongeBob connection so effective. Because the show did not invent a spooky backstory out of nothing. It planted its cheerful little town, its pineapple house, and its fast food restaurant and its jellyfish fields, directly on top of a real place with a real and genuinely tragic nuclear history. And then, it named the town in a way that points right at it. Bikini Bottom. The bottom of Bikini. The floor of the lagoon beneath the atoll where the bombs went off. Once you know the name is not a random silly word but a real coordinate on a real map, the rest of the theories stop feeling like they were pulled out of thin air. They start feeling like people noticing something that was sitting in plain sight the whole time. Now, the man who made this show was not a random gag writer who happened to pick an ocean setting because it was colorful. This is where the coincidence starts to feel less like a coincidence, and it is worth slowing down on, because it changes how you weigh everything that comes after. The creator of SpongeBob SquarePants was Stephen Hillenburg, and before he ever drew a single frame of animation, he was a marine biologist. Not a hobbyist, not a guy who liked aquariums, an actual trained scientist. He majored in marine biology and minored in art at Humboldt State University, and he went on to teach marine science at an ocean institute in California, standing in front of students explaining tide pools and reef ecology and the genuinely bizarre real creatures that live down there. Only later did he move into animation, carrying all of that ocean knowledge with him. That background is the reason the show is full of real biology hiding under the jokes. The little details that most viewers glide past are frequently accurate. Real sea sponges, real sea stars, real anemones and tube worms, and the strange gelatinous drifting things that inspired the jellyfish. Hillenburg knew this world intimately. So when people ask whether a man like that, a marine scientist who chose the ocean as his life twice over, first as a career and then as an art form, would have known exactly what Bikini Atoll was and what had happened there, the honest answer is that it is very hard to imagine he did not. A marine biologist choosing a Pacific Ocean floor as his setting and landing on the name Bikini Bottom is not the same as a random writer picking a funny word. That does not prove intent. Hillenburg, to my knowledge, never sat down and spelled out a grim nuclear allegory as the true meaning of his Sunny Kids show, and I am not going to tell you he did. But the pieces are all real, and the man arranging them knew the ocean better than almost anyone in his field, and that is the ground the very first and strongest theory grows out of. So let us walk into that one properly. The theory goes like this, and it is the one everything else in this video hangs off of, so I want to lay it out slowly. The idea is that the creatures of Bikini Bottom are what they are. Talking, walking, playing clarinets, driving boats, building robots, running businesses, precisely because they are mutations. The nuclear tests at Bikini Atoll saturated the reef with radiation, and in the logic of the theory that radiation did what radiation does in 1,000 comic books and monster movies, it changed things. It rewrote the sea life. The sponge that would normally sit motionless on the seafloor filtering water now has a face, a job, a driver's license, a pet snail, and a laugh you could hear through concrete. The starfish that would normally do nothing but slowly digest a clam now talks, sleeps under a rock, and holds opinions. Everything that is impossible about Bikini Bottom, every talking animal and every physics-breaking gag gets a single tidy explanation. It is all downstream of the bombs. This is usually credited to a user on the internet forum Reddit, someone posting years ago under a handle that circulates as Capmaster. Though I would gently flag that the exact origin of any theory that spreads this widely is hard to pin to one person, and you will see it described as widely credited, rather than definitively proven to come from that single post. What matters more than who typed it first is how well it fits. Because the thing about a good conspiracy theory, the kind that sticks for a decade, is that it does not require you to ignore the show. It requires you to look at the series more closely. And when you look closely at SpongeBob, the mutation reading keeps finding little pieces of evidence that were sitting there all along. Start with the explosions, because the series is cheerfully, endlessly obsessed with them. Things blow up in Bikini Bottom constantly, and the visual language of those explosions, the shape of the blast, the rising cloud, the way an eruption blooms upward, echoes the imagery of a nuclear detonation more than it echoes, say, a stick of dynamite. Then look at the sheer biological wrongness of the place presented as completely normal. A squirrel lives underwater in an air-filled dome, and nobody finds this strange. A sponge and a starfish are best friends. A crab is the father of a whale. Creatures reproduce, grow, shrink, split, and regenerate in ways no real animal could. In a normal cartoon, you would just call that cartoon logic and move on. But the mutation theory offers a frame where the wrongness is the point, where Bikini Bottom is not a whimsical fantasy, but a damaged ecosystem that scrambled its own rules after absorbing more nuclear energy than almost any place on Earth. For years, this stayed exactly where theories like this usually stay, which is in the comment sections and the forum threads and the late-night conversations. Unconfirmed, unofficial, fun to believe, and impossible to prove. The show never addressed it. And that silence is its own kind of answer, because a show can always deny something if it wants to. Nickelodeon could have had a writer laugh it off in an interview, could have said, "No, it is just a colorful ocean, there is nothing dark under there." As far as the record shows, that flat denial never came. The theory just sat there, never confirmed, never killed. And then, in late 2024, something happened that pushed this out of the territory of pure fan speculation and into a much stranger place. In a cast interview published around December of that year, tied to the magazine Esquire, one of the show's longtime writers spoke about the origins of Bikini Bottom, and he did not swat the nuclear theory away. He leaned into it. This is Doug Lawrence, known to fans as Mr. Lawrence, the man who has voiced Plankton for the show's entire run, and who has written and story-edited a huge amount of it. He is not a random intern. He is one of the people who actually built this world, and what he described was not the sunny reading. He talked about Bikini Bottom in terms of the nuclear testing, and he went further than the classic theory, suggesting a framing where the setting sits in the aftermath of something apocalyptic, where the world up above, the surface world, the human world, is essentially gone. Bikini Bottom, in the way he framed it, is close to being what is left. I need to be careful here, because I am paraphrasing, and the precise wording of what he said has been reported and re-reported across the outlets that cover the show, and I do not want to put a fabricated exact sentence in his mouth. So take this as the shape of it rather than a transcript. The shape is that a person with real authorship over SpongeBob SquarePants publicly endorsed the idea that this is a post-nuclear, post-catastrophe world, and that the cheerful town at the bottom of the sea exists in the shadow of a surface that did not make it. For a theory that spent years as an unprovable internet reading, that is about as close to a confirmation as fans were ever likely to get, and it landed exactly on the premise of this whole video, because notice what it is. It is not the series saying it. It is a writer saying it. In an interview, decades in, it is a hint, an endorsement from behind the curtain, and it is the difference between something being canon and something being, in the truest sense, never denied. And here is where I have to be the honest narrator instead of the excited one, because if I just left it there, I would be doing the thing this channel promises never to do, which is dress up a theory as a fact. So let me hold it up against the series as it actually aired, because the series contradicts the dark reading in some very obvious ways. The surface world is not gone in SpongeBob. It shows up over and over. There are the live-action segments with a real human, the diver character the fans call the live-action diver, who appears in the earliest episodes. There are trips to the surface. In the feature films, the characters go up onto dry land, into a world full of living humans, real beaches, real people walking around. If everyone upstairs were dead, none of that would be there. So the writers aside, and the series as broadcast, do not fully agree. One says the surface is a graveyard, the other keeps showing you the surface full of life. That contradiction does not ruin the theory. If anything, it sharpens exactly what kind of thing we are dealing with all night, because this is the pattern you are going to see again and again in the hours ahead. A real, verifiable foundation, in this case an actual nuclear test site and an actual writer's comments. A theory built on top of it that is genuinely compelling. And then the show itself, which neither fully commits to the dark version nor bothers to slam the door on it. The nuclear origin is the strongest example we have of a theory the series never denied, because a key writer effectively confirmed the seed of it, while the aired episodes keep their options open. You are allowed to believe Bikini Bottom is a mutated afterglow of the atomic age. Nothing in the official record forces you to stop, and nothing in it forces you to start either. That gap, that open door, is the whole reason we are here. The part of this that stays with me is not the explosions or the mutations. It is that real underwater footage of the Baker test, the sea standing up into a tower, and the real coral that grew back afterward, thriving on a nuclear graveyard. Because whether or not Hillenburg ever meant to encode it, that is the emotional truth the series is sitting on. Bright, resilient, almost aggressive life, blooming in a place that absorbed the worst thing people ever made. A yellow sponge who cannot be made to stop being happy, living on the exact spot where the world tried its hardest to end everything. You do not have to call that a conspiracy. You could just call it the loveliest accident in the history of children's television. But the series has never told us which one it is, and that is the point. Let me take you from the water to the food. Because if the nuclear origin is the biggest theory about the world of the show, then the secret of the Krabby Patty is the biggest theory about a single object inside it, and it has been chewed over for longer and by more people than almost anything else in the whole series. Here is the setup, in case you have somehow never fallen down this particular hole. The Krabby Patty is the signature burger sold at the Krusty Krab. It is the thing everyone in Bikini Bottom is addicted to. Its recipe is a closely guarded secret, kept under lock, and the entire ongoing war between Mr. Krabs and Plankton exists because Plankton wants that formula, and Mr. Krabs will do almost anything to keep it from him. The formula is treated in the series as sacred, world-shakingly valuable, worth spying on, stealing, and going to war over. And in all those years, the series has been extremely careful never to just tell you, plainly and finally, what is actually in it. That withholding is the entire engine, and a secret that valuable, kept that deliberately, is exactly the kind of thing fans cannot leave alone. The oldest and most popular theory is the dark one. The theory is that the secret ingredient is crab. That the reason Krabby Patties are so irresistible, and the reason Mr. Krabs guards the recipe like it could end him, is that he is grinding up his own kind and serving them to the town. It sounds absurd until you start pulling the threads the show itself dangles. Mr. Krabs is a crab. His restaurant sells patties named after him. And there is a specific moment fans point to as the closest the series ever came to admitting it. A scene in the 3rd season, in an episode called Midlife Crustacean, where Mr. Krabs eats something and delivers a line that lands like a confession. A moment where he tastes the food and reacts as if he recognizes the flavor as his own. That line, the one where he says something to the effect of, "So that is what I taste like," has been screenshotted and passed around for 2 decades as the crab meat theory's smoking gun. The series played it for a laugh. Fans took it as a clue. And crucially, at the time, nobody official rushed out to correct the record. For years that was the state of things. The crab meat theory was the dominant reading. The series never confirmed it and never really denied it. And the ambiguity did all the work. But this is one of the rare cases where we actually got an answer from the production side. And the answer is worth sitting with, because it complicates everything. In interviews, one of the show's executive producers, Vincent Waller, addressed the crab meat theory directly and shut it down. He recounted that Stephen Hillenburg himself had let slip what the deal really was, and the deal, according to that account, is that there is no meat in a Krabby Patty at all. No animal product. Nothing like that. The official line, coming from the top, from the creator by way of a producer, is that the crab meat theory is simply false. The burger is not made of Mr. Krabs' relatives. It is, in that telling, meatless. So case closed, right? Here is why it is not, and why this is such a satisfying not. Because the show as aired does not actually behave as though the burger is meatless. There are episodes where the formula, or the food at the Krusty Krab, is tied to chum, which is ground up fish, actual animal flesh. The same word used for the bloody bait you throw off a boat to draw sharks. In episodes like Friend or Foe and Call the Cops, chum turns up in the story of the food in ways that sit badly against a clean, no animal product claim. Plankton runs a rival restaurant called the Chum Bucket, whose whole gimmick is that its food is made of chum and is disgusting, and the running joke depends on chum being a real, gross, meat-based substance in this world. So on one side you have a producer telling you, straight, that Hillenburg said there is no meat in it. On the other side you have the series itself, across multiple episodes, treating fish meat as part of the culinary reality of that kitchen. Both of those things are on the record. They do not fully agree. This is the part I find more interesting than either simple answer, because it means the true state of the Krabby Patty is not confirmed, and it is not denied, it is contradicted, by the series against its own creator. The crab meat version was denied, but a clean, wholesome, meatless burger is not really what the episodes show you either. What you are left with is a gap. and into that gap the other theories rush. Because the crab meat idea is not the only one. There is a strain of theory that the secret ingredient is nothing at all, that the formula is a placebo, that the patty is ordinary, and that the real secret Mr. Krabs is protecting is the fact that there is no secret, only the belief in one, and the belief is what keeps the town coming back and keeps Plankton convinced there is treasure to steal. I have a soft spot for this reading, because it is about as SpongeBob as an idea can get. The whole economy of Bikini Bottom running on an addiction to something that might be completely mundane, a town at war over an empty box. It is also, I should say clearly, a fan theory with no confirmation behind it whatsoever. Nothing official supports it. It is just a lovely idea. And then there is the darkest and most internet strain, the one that says the secret ingredient is a drug. The version you will see most often names it as a kind of cocaine, sometimes dressed up with a made-up brand name that circulates online, the sort of slang term that started as a joke and got treated as evidence. The appeal is obvious. It would explain the addiction, the desperation, the way otherwise reasonable characters lose their minds over a burger. But I want to be plain about the register here, because this one has nothing behind it except vibes, and the fact that any addiction plot can be reframed as a drug metaphor if you squint. There is no writer interview, no on-screen wink, no production comment giving it weight. It is the flimsiest of the formula theories, and it survives purely because it is lurid and because the series refuses, as always, to just tell you the answer and end the game. Step back and look at what the Krabby Patty actually is as a piece of storytelling, because this is where I land on it. The secret formula is one of the great examples in television of a mystery box that works precisely by never opening. The show figured out very early that the value of the formula to the story was entirely in it being unknown. The second you learn the ingredient, the war between Krabs and Plankton loses its fuel, the tension deflates, the whole machine stops. So the writers protected the emptiness the same way Mr. Krabs protects the recipe, fiercely and forever, because the emptiness is the asset. And that means every theory, the crab meat, the nothing, the drug, is fans trying to open a box the series is structurally never going to open, because opening it would kill the thing that makes it valuable. What did the series actually confirm, and what did it deny? It denied, through a producer citing the creator, that there is meat in it. It has never confirmed any positive answer of its own, and it has quietly kept muddying its own denial by putting chum in the story anyway. That is the Krabby Patty in a nutshell, a secret defended so well that even the people who made it cannot give you a straight, consistent answer, and I would argue that is not a mistake. That is the recipe. The formula was never really an ingredient. It was the promise never to tell you, and that promise they have kept. Now we move from the world and the food to the people, because the next great cluster of theories is not about where Bikini Bottom is or what its burgers are made of. It is about who these characters actually are underneath the bright colors. And the tidiest, most elegant version of that idea, the one that has launched 1,000 video essays, is that the main cast of SpongeBob SquarePants is a hidden portrait of the 7 deadly sins. If you have not heard this one, it works like a key that slots into a lock, and that is exactly what makes it so persuasive and so worth being skeptical about. The mapping goes something like this, though I want to stress up front that the exact assignments shift from telling to telling, and that instability is itself a clue. In the version you hear most often, Mr. Krabs is greed, and honestly that one barely needs arguing. The man is money in the shape of a crab. He loves his first dollar more than most people love their children. Squidward is wrath, the permanent simmering anger, the contempt, the short fuse. Plankton is envy, forever coveting what Mr. Krabs has, defined entirely by wanting what belongs to someone else. Patrick is sloth, and again the case writes itself. He lives under a rock and does as close to nothing as a conscious being can manage. Sandy is pride, the boastful one, proudest of Texas, proudest of her strength and her science. Gary the snail gets gluttony in many versions, the endlessly hungry pet who cannot be fed enough. And SpongeBob, in the reading people cite the oftenest, is lust, which is the assignment people find the strangest, and which usually gets reinterpreted not as anything crude, but as an unrestrained, overflowing appetite for life, an intensity of desire aimed at everything, jellyfishing, his job, his friends, existence itself. Laid out like that, it feels almost too clean, and the too clean quality is what should make you slow down, because the human brain is a pattern machine, and the 7 deadly sins are a famous, ready-made set of 7 slots, and SpongeBob happens to have a memorable ensemble of characters, each built around one exaggerated trait. Give a pattern-seeking mind 7 vivid personalities and 7 labeled boxes, and it will find a way to fill the boxes every single time, whether or not anyone designed it that way. That is the thing about this theory you have to hold in your head. Its neatness is not evidence that it was intended. Its neatness might just be evidence that we are very good at matching 7s to 7s. So did anyone actually build the cast this way? Here is where it lands right in the middle of this video's whole reason for existing, because the answer is not a clean yes, and it is not a clean no. Doug Lawrence, the same writer and plankton voice we met with the nuclear theory, has spoken about the design of the characters, and what he acknowledged is something looser and, I think, more interesting than the tidy sins map. He described the idea that each character represents something, that the ensemble was built the way a lot of classic ensembles are built, where every member embodies a distinct quality so that they bounce off each other cleanly. He reached for a comparison to an older show, the way the castaways on Gilligan's Island were each a type, the movie star, the professor, the millionaire, each one a single clear function in the group. That is a real and common way to construct a cast. But notice what it is and what it is not. Acknowledging that each character represents a trait is a long way from confirming that those traits are specifically the 7 deadly sins of Christian theology, deliberately encoded. So what we have is a partial nod. A writer saying, yes, each of them stands for something, without ever saying, and that something is a sin, and here is the map. And there is, by every account I can find, no evidence that Stephen Hillenburg sat down and built his cast as an allegory of pride and wrath and envy. Hillenburg's whole sensibility, everything documented about how he worked, points toward character and comedy and ocean life, rather than toward hidden theological schemes. The sins reading is something fans laid over the top of a cast that was designed to be varied, and the design being varied is exactly why the overlay fits so well. It is a bit like noticing that the days of the week can be matched to the classical planets. The match is real, but you did not discover a secret. You discovered that someone, long ago, built one system out of the other, and here the someone is the fans, not the show. This is the point in the theory where I land somewhere that might sound like a dodge, but is, I think, the honest place to be. The 7 deadly sins reading is false as a claim about intent, and true as a description of the show's texture. It is false to say the writers encoded the sins. It is fair to say the series is, in its bones, a comedy about vice, about characters ruled by a single overwhelming appetite or flaw, greed and anger and envy and sloth, watching those flaws collide and generate the plot. The sins are not a hidden code in SpongeBob. They are just what the comedy is made of, the way most comedy about a fixed ensemble is made of a few big human failings crashing into each other. The theory mistakes the raw material for a secret message, but I understand why, because when the material is this consistent, it really does start to look like a plan. And this is the first place where the shape of the whole night comes clear, so let me name it. The strongest theories in the SpongeBob universe are not the ones that require the show to be lying to you. They are the ones that require the series to be honest about something it was always doing in plain sight. Bikini Bottom really is on a nuclear site. Mr. Krabs really is defined by greed. The characters really are each a walking trait. The theory then takes that true observation and screws one extra turn onto it, one turn past what anyone actually confirmed, into radiation mutants or a specific sins allegory, and it is that final turn that the series never confirms and never quite bothers to deny. The nod from the writer covers the true part. Each character represents something and stops right at the edge of the extra turn. That edge, again and again, is where we are going to keep finding ourselves tonight. If you want my actual opinion, and this is only an opinion, I think the reason the sins version specifically caught on, over any number of other 7-part schemes you could invent, is that it flatters the viewer. It lets an adult who grew up on a kids' show feel that they were secretly watching something older and darker and more literary the whole time, a medieval morality play in swim trunks. And the series, characteristically, never takes that flattery away from anyone. It lets you believe you found a cathedral hidden inside a cartoon, and it never once tells you that you built the cathedral yourself out of a comedy that was only ever trying to make you laugh. That is a kind of generosity, if you think about it. The series leaves the door open and lets you decorate the room. The next reading of the characters is a gentler one, and a more modern one, and it comes with a rare thing attached, an actual on-the-record comment from the man who has voiced SpongeBob for the entire life of the show. So this one deserves careful handling, because it touches real people and real conditions, and the temptation to be glib about it is exactly the temptation to resist. The idea, in its broad form, is that the characters of Bikini Bottom can be read as a spread of neurological and psychological profiles, and that SpongeBob in particular reads as autistic. Now, before we go anywhere near the internet version of this, I want to plant the firmest fact, because it is unusually solid for anything in this video. At a comic convention in 2024, the Motor City Comic Con, Tom Kenny, the voice of SpongeBob and of Gary the Snail, said in front of an audience that he personally thinks of SpongeBob as autistic. That is real. Kenny has lived inside this character longer than almost anyone. He has voiced him since the very beginning, and he offered that reading himself, warmly, as his own understanding of who SpongeBob is. I want to be precise about what that is and what it is not, because the distinction matters, and this channel does not blur it. It is the voice actor's personal interpretation. It is not a line in a script, it is not a plot point, it is not the show or Nickelodeon declaring an official diagnosis for a cartoon character. It is a deeply informed opinion from the person closest to the role, offered as an opinion. But it is also not nothing, and it is not mockery. And the reason it resonated with so many people is that when you go looking, SpongeBob fits the reading in ways that feel less like a stretch than most of what we are covering tonight. Think about how he actually moves through the world. He has intense, all-consuming special interests, jellyfishing above all, pursued with a focus and a joy that never dims. He thrives on routine and structure. He loves his job with a sincerity that other characters find baffling. He follows the rules of the Krusty Krab as if they were laws of physics. He takes language literally. He reads social situations differently from those around him, missing certain cues, feeling others overwhelmingly. His emotions run at full volume, delight and despair both, with little of the muffling that adults are expected to learn. And crucially, the series never treats these things as failings to be cured. SpongeBob is not a problem the series wants to fix. He is the hero, the kindest and most fully alive person in Bikini Bottom, and the joke, when there is a joke, is almost always on the jaded characters who cannot feel things as purely as he can. Read through the lens Tom Kenny offered, SpongeBob becomes something quietly moving, a character built, whether by intention or by instinct, as a portrait of a mind that works differently and is celebrated rather than pitied for it. Now here is where I have to draw a hard line, because there is a much bigger and much sloppier version of this idea, and it went viral, and it does not deserve the same respect. Around early 2023, a wave of videos spread across TikTok, pushing a grid where every single character is assigned a specific clinical disorder. SpongeBob gets one label, Patrick gets another, Squidward another, on down the cast, each one matched to a named condition, as if the whole show were a coded diagnostic chart. And I want to be blunt about this one. There is no basis for it. It is not something the writers built. It is not something anyone involved in the show has endorsed. And much of it slides from thoughtful interpretation into using real conditions as punchlines, matching a character's most cartoonish trait to a diagnosis for shock value. That is a different activity entirely from what Tom Kenny was doing. He offered a considered reading of one character, grounded in years of playing him. The viral grid grabbed a set of medical terms and stapled them onto a cast for engagement. Those are not the same thing, and I would not want you drifting off tonight thinking they carry the same weight. The honest verdict here is layered, so let me lay the layers out clearly. The autistic reading of SpongeBob has real, named support from the character's own voice actor, offered as personal interpretation, never as official canon. And it is a reading the show's writing quietly rewards if you go looking. The broader "everyone has a disorder" chart is an internet product with no authority behind it, and parts of it are frankly disrespectful to the conditions it borrows. And the series itself, true to form, has never issued a statement either way. It has never confirmed that SpongeBob is meant to be autistic, and it has never denied it. It simply keeps writing him exactly as he has always been, and lets the person who voices him and the people who watch him make of that what they will. What I keep coming back to with this one is that it might be the gentlest theory in the whole set, and the least conspiratorial, even though it wears the costume of a fan theory, because it is not really trying to expose a hidden darkness under the show. It is trying to name something a lot of viewers felt without having the words for it, that SpongeBob was the first character who made a certain kind of different feel like a superpower instead of a defect. If that is a conspiracy, it is the kindest one on the list. And the fact that the series never confirmed it does not weaken it. In a way, it strengthens it, because SpongeBob was never written to be a lesson or a label. He was written to be himself, completely and without apology, and a character written that way is the sort of character people find themselves in. The series did not need to say it out loud. It just had to keep him whole, and it did. If the mental health reading is the kindest theory about the characters, the next one is its shadow. The same instinct to map the cast onto a hidden system, but pointed at something darker and with far less to stand on. This is the theory that every main character in SpongeBob is a stand-in for a different drug, that Bikini Bottom is a coded chart of intoxication, and that the whole show is secretly about being high in various specific ways. I want to walk through it, because it is popular and you will run into it, but I want to be clear from the first sentence that this one lives entirely in the speculation register. Nobody who made the series has endorsed it. There is no wink, no interview, no Easter egg propping it up. It is a fan reading, full stop, and I am going to treat it as one. The mapping usually goes like this. SpongeBob is psychedelic mushrooms, and the case rests on his imagination, the way reality bends and warps around him, the sudden shifts from euphoric wonder to sudden dread, the good trips and the bad trips, the sense that he perceives a version of the world that is more vivid and less stable than everyone else's. Patrick is marijuana, the slow speech, the heavy eyes, the permanent mellow haze, the appetite, the way he drifts through consequences without ever quite touching them. Squidward, in this reading, gets assigned to something heavier and more depressive, an opiate, on the grounds of his flatness, his lethargy, his misery, his checked-out contempt for a job he sleepwalks through. And Mr. Krabs, and sometimes Mrs. Puff, get slotted in as stimulants, cocaine specifically, on the strength of the paranoia, the tight temper, the money obsession, the jittery guarding of what is theirs. Now, laid out that way, you can feel it doing the same trick the sins theory did. It takes a set of characters who were each built around one loud, exaggerated trait, and it finds a second system, the pharmacology of getting high, that also happens to be organized around loud, exaggerated states, and it matches the two lists. Slowness matches the stereotype of one drug, mania matches another, paranoia matches a third. And because cartoon characters are, by design, exaggerated states of being with legs, almost any character can be matched to almost any altered state if you are motivated to do it. The theory feels like it is revealing something because the fit is loose enough to always work and specific enough to sound clever. That is the machinery of it. So why does this one land so much weaker than the others, even though it is structurally the same move? A few reasons, and they are worth naming because they are the tools you use to weigh any theory like this. First, there is no external support of any kind. With the nuclear origin, a writer confirmed the seed. With the sins, a writer nodded at the each character represents something idea. With the autism reading, the lead voice actor said it out loud. The drug theory has none of that. Not a single person connected to the production has ever given it oxygen, and in the absence of any confirmation, all you are left with is the pattern matching, and pattern matching with nothing behind it is just a party trick. Second, it requires you to ignore the actual texture of the show, which is relentlessly, almost aggressively wholesome. This is a series about friendship and work and a sweet, silly optimism, made by a marine biologist for children, and reading it as a drug chart means treating its wholesomeness as a disguise, which is a big claim to make with zero evidence. And third, and this is the piece I find most telling, the drug theory does not actually explain anything the series leaves mysterious. The nuclear theory answers a real question: why is any of this alive and talking? The formula theory answers a real question: what is Mr. Krabs hiding? The drug theory answers nothing. The characters behave the way they behave for reasons the series already gives you. Patrick is lazy because he is written as lazy. Squidward is miserable because his whole comedic engine is being a frustrated artist stuck in a fast food job. You do not need a secret drug to explain a trait the series explains on its own. The theory adds a hidden layer that does no work, and a hidden layer that does no work is usually a hidden layer that is not there. Here is my honest read on why it exists at all, and it is the same reason a lot of these darker mappings exist. There is a whole genre of adult internet culture built around taking a beloved childhood thing and revealing it as secretly about sex, or death, or drugs, because that reversal is funny, and it makes the person delivering it feel worldly. SpongeBob, being the best-loved childhood thing of an entire generation, and also being truly surreal in its visuals, is the perfect target for that game. The show is so bright and so strange at the same time that you can point at almost any trippy sequence, and there are many, and say, see, drugs. But a surreal visual is not a coded confession. Hillenburg came out of an era of experimental and independent animation. He loved the medium's ability to distort and stretch and dream, and that aesthetic is the reason the series looks like a hallucination sometimes. It is an art style, not a shopping list of narcotics. So where does it land? In the confirmed and denied framework we keep returning to. This is one of the few where I will not even say the series never denied it, because that framing gives it too much dignity. There was never anything for the series to deny. It is a reading imposed from outside, with no thread inside the series reaching back to meet it, and the fairest thing to say is that it is unconfirmed, unsupported, and almost certainly just a game people play with a show whose imagery makes the game easy. I include it because leaving it out would be dishonest. You deserve the whole landscape. But I want you drifting off tonight, able to tell the difference between the theories the series planted and left ambiguous, and the theories the internet grew in a vacuum. This one is the vacuum kind. A fun vacuum, a harmless one, but a vacuum all the same. There is a theory that sits right between the respectful autism reading and the empty drug chart, and it is one of the most detailed and hotly argued in the whole SpongeBob canon of theories. It has a nickname that tells you everything about its tone. Fans call it SpongeNam. The idea is that SpongeBob is a war veteran, that he served in some Bikini Bottom equivalent of a brutal conflict, and that the cheerful, hyperactive, relentlessly positive Sponge you watch every day is a man managing severe post-traumatic stress, holding himself together with routine and forced brightness because the alternative is unthinkable. I will tell you now that this one, like the drug theory, was never confirmed by anyone who made the series, and the creator, when the general shape of it came up, gently pointed in a completely different direction. But unlike the drug theory, this reading is built almost entirely out of details that are actually in the series, and that is what makes it worth sitting with. It is not imposed from outside. It is assembled from things SpongeBob actually does, and once someone lines those things up for you, they are very hard to unsee. Start with the routine, because the theory starts there. SpongeBob lives by a rigid, almost military structure. He is jolted awake by a horn, a sound that reads less like an alarm clock and more like a reveille, the bugle call that starts a soldier's day. He responds to it instantly, up and ready, no grogginess, as if being slow to rise were dangerous. His day is ordered, disciplined, oriented entirely around duty and service. Then look at how he speaks to authority. He calls Mr. Krabs Sir. In the very first episode, when he goes to apply for his job, the theory points to the way he presents himself. The salute-like eagerness, a line about permission to come aboard, delivered with the formality of a sailor reporting for duty. His boss is a captain figure who runs a restaurant like a tight ship, and SpongeBob relates to him with the deference of a soldier to a commanding officer. Then there is the fixation on combat. SpongeBob is obsessed with karate. He practices it constantly, ambushes his friends with it, treats it with a seriousness that goes well past a hobby, and the theory reframes that not as childish fun, but as combat readiness. A man who cannot stop training, cannot stand down, cannot let his guard drop even in peacetime. And then, holding all of it together, there is the positivity itself, and this is the part of the theory that turns it from a game into something that truly unsettles people. The argument is that SpongeBob's endless, aggressive optimism is not innocence at all. It is a coping mechanism. It is the mask a traumatized mind wears to keep the darkness underneath from surfacing. The brighter he is, the harder he is working to hold something back. His breakdowns, the moments where he panics or spirals or comes apart over something small, get read as the trauma leaking through the seams. And then the theory reaches for its keystone, which is Mr. Krabs, because here it touches something that is actually canon. Mr. Krabs is, in the show, a military veteran. His past as a sailor and his service are part of his established backstory, referenced in the series. So the theory says, there it is, the connection. SpongeBob and Mr. Krabs serve together. The Krusty Krab is not really a restaurant, but a kind of shared foxhole where two veterans keep reenacting the structure of the service that damaged them. One is the captain, one is the loyal soldier who will follow any order without question. It is an eerie reading, and it has the advantage that one of its load-bearing pieces, Mr. Krabs having a military past, is not a fan invention at all. But this is where I have to separate the strands carefully, because the theory does a sleight of hand you should watch for. It is true that Mr. Krabs is a veteran. It is not true, in any canonical sense, that SpongeBob is. SpongeBob's supposed military service is entirely a fan construction, read backward out of his personality. The horn, the sir, the karate, the discipline, all of that is real on screen, but none of it is the series telling you he was a soldier. It is the theory interpreting a set of quirks through a single lens, and then presenting the interpretation as if it were the buried history. That is the extra turn again. The same move we keep watching theories make. Take the true thing. SpongeBob is disciplined and Mr. Krabs is a veteran, and screw one turn past it into SpongeBob is a traumatized combat veteran, a claim the series never makes. There is a reason this fits our title perfectly, because we actually have something close to a response from the creator. When the general question of why SpongeBob is the way he is has come up, the answer from Hillenburg's side was not dark at all. The stated intent, the thing Hillenburg reportedly wanted, was simply for SpongeBob to love his job. That is it. Not to hide trauma behind it, not to survive it, to love it. The rigid routine, the devotion to the Krusty Krab, the eagerness, all of it was meant to express pure, uncomplicated enthusiasm, a character who is happy in a way most people have forgotten how to be. So the creator did not confirm the war veteran reading, and he did not exactly stage a big public denial of it either. He just, when the door was open, pointed calmly at a much simpler and sunnier explanation, and walked through that one instead, which leaves the theory in that now familiar limbo. Redirected, not destroyed. Because notice that Hillenburg saying SpongeBob was meant to love his job does not actually disprove the trauma reading, it just offers a competing one, and a determined theorist will say, of course that is the surface intent. The trauma is underneath. The love of the job is the coping mechanism. You cannot fully argue someone out of this, because it is built to absorb the denial. That is the mark of the stickiest theories. They are shaped so that the official explanation becomes just another layer of the mask. I do not believe the SpongeNam reading, to be clear. I think SpongeBob is exactly what Hillenburg said, a being who loves his small life completely. But I will admit that the series handed the theory an unusual amount of raw material. The horn, the salute, the veteran boss, and then never went out of its way to take any of it back. And that combination is why, of all the character theories, this is the one that lingers. We have looked at where Bikini Bottom is, what its food is made of, and who its people secretly are. Now comes the theory that reframes the entire place at once, the one that says Bikini Bottom is not a town at all. It is an afterlife. It is a purgatory. And every character you have ever watched is, in some sense, already dead. This is the theory that reaches for the biggest possible claim, and I want to hold it at exactly the arm's length it deserves, because there is no confirmation for it anywhere, not from a writer, not from an interview, not from an on-screen wink. It belongs entirely to the fans, but it connects back to the nuclear origin we started with in a way that makes it feel less like a wild swing and more like the natural endpoint of a thought, and that connection is what keeps it alive. Here is the reasoning. If you take the darkest version of the nuclear reading seriously, the version where the surface world is gone, where the bombs did not just mutate the sea life but ended everything above the waterline, then Bikini Bottom stops being a happy town beneath a living world and becomes something closer to a bubble of existence persisting after the end. And once you are thinking that way, a second, older kind of story slides right into place. The Purgatory story. The idea of souls caught in a place between, repeating themselves, unable to move on, unaware that anything is wrong. The theory says that is what Bikini Bottom is. A pocket of the dead, going through the motions of a life that already ended, and the reason no one there notices is that no one there is meant to notice. That is how Purgatory works in the stories we tell about it. The trapped do not know they are trapped. And then the theory points at the structure of the series itself as its evidence, and this is the clever part, because it does not need any hidden frames or secret episodes. It just needs you to notice the format. SpongeBob wakes up, he goes to the Krusty Krab, he flips patties, something goes wrong, or something silly happens, and by the end it resets, and the next episode he wakes up again, in the same house, in the same bed, and goes to the same job, and none of it has changed, and none of it will ever change. Squidward will never escape. Mr. Krabs will never have enough money. Plankton will never get the formula. SpongeBob will never stop being happy, and he will never, ever leave. The series is a loop, and the theory takes that loop, which is just the nature of episodic cartoons, and reframes it as damnation. Not a job you go to. A day you are sentenced to repeat forever, with a smile, because you cannot conceive of it ending. I have to be fair to how unsettling that reframe is, because it lands hardest on the character it was practically built to describe, and that character is Squidward. Think about Squidward's entire existence for a second. Stripped of the comedy, he is miserable. He is trapped in a job he hates, next to a neighbor whose happiness he cannot understand and cannot escape, dreaming of an artistic life and a recognition that never, ever comes. And it never comes not because of one bad break, but because the format structurally forbids it. Squidward cannot win, because if Squidward won, if he became the famous artist and moved away and found peace, there would be no more Squidward. His suffering is load-bearing. The show needs him unhappy to keep working, so the machinery of the series ensures he stays unhappy, episode after episode, decade after decade. Read literally, that is one of the more quietly horrifying setups in television. A being whose torment is required, forever, by the rules of the world he lives in. The Purgatory theory says, of course, because that is what Purgatory is, and Squidward is the one soul in Bikini Bottom close enough to awareness to feel the walls. Now let me pull hard in the other direction, because I do not actually believe this, and I think the reasons it fails are as interesting as the reasons it appeals. The loop is not evidence of an afterlife. It is evidence of a syndication model. Every episodic show that is built to air in any order, forever, has to reset, because a show that permanently changed every episode would have a finite length and could not run for a quarter of a century. The reset is a production requirement, not a metaphysical one, and reading it as damnation is reading the constraints of the format as if they were the content of the story. You could apply the exact same logic to almost any long-running cartoon and conclude that all of them are set in hell, which tells you the argument proves too much. When a theory would work equally well on every show of its type, it is usually describing the type, not the series. There is also the plain fact that the show, when it wants to, does let things change and move and go somewhere. Characters travel, they leave Bikini Bottom, they go to the surface, they visit other places entirely. The Purgatory reading needs the world to be a sealed and static box, and the actual series keeps puncturing the box whenever a story calls for it. A true Purgatory does not have field trips. But here is where I land, and it is a little different from where I landed on the drug theory, because this one earns something the drug theory did not. The Purgatory reading is unconfirmed and, I think, wrong as a literal claim, yet it is pointing at a true feeling. There is something about SpongeBob, something a lot of adults feel returning to it, that is truly a little melancholy underneath the color, the eternal sameness, the way no one ages, no one escapes, no one's deepest wish is ever granted, and the sun comes up over the same reef every single morning on the same small lives. The series is not literally about the afterlife, but it is, in its structure, about a kind of beautiful, unchanging permanence. A world where nothing is ever really lost because nothing is ever really allowed to move, and depending on your mood, that can feel like comfort or it can feel like a very soft kind of horror. The theory takes the horror reading and makes it literal. The series never confirms it and never quite denies it, and I suspect that is because the melancholy the theory feeds on is real, even if the ghosts are not. What is trapped in Bikini Bottom is not souls, it is time, and a show where time cannot move is going to keep inviting people to wonder whether everyone in it is already gone. Let me turn now to a set of oddities that are different in kind from everything we have covered so far, because these are not fan theories layered on top of the show. These are strange facts that are actually in the series, or actually said by the people who made it, and they are strange enough that they generate theories all by themselves. The first of them is about SpongeBob's body and his nature, and it starts with a real media storm that most people have forgotten ever happened. Back in 2005, SpongeBob got pulled into a genuine cultural argument, one that had nothing to do with cartoons and everything to do with the politics of the moment. The character had become so universally beloved so much a symbol of harmless childhood fun, that he ended up at the center of a very adult debate about whether he was, of all things, secretly gay, and whether he was being used to promote a message to children. It became real news. And in the middle of it, Stephen Hillenburg was asked directly, and his answer is one of the quietly important things anyone ever said about the character. Because it did not just address the controversy, it revealed how Hillenburg actually understood his creation. He said, in effect, that they never intended the characters to be gay, and then he offered the phrase that has followed SpongeBob ever since. He said he considered them to be almost asexual, not straight, not gay, almost asexual. And I want to slow down on that, because it is easy to hear it as a defensive dodge in a media fight, and I do not think it was. I think it was Hillenburg telling the truth about the character's design. SpongeBob is not a being organized around romance or desire in the way most fictional characters are. He can fall in love. The show has stories where he develops a sweet, childlike crush, but it is the love of a kid, uncomplicated and free of anything below the surface. His deepest bonds are friendships. His great passions are his job and jellyfishing and Gary. Sexuality is simply not part of the machine he is built out of, and Hillenburg naming that, calling him almost asexual, was less a denial than an accurate description of a character who exists a little outside that whole dimension of life. And this connects to something that is not opinion at all, but hard canon, and it is one of my favorite pieces of hidden biology in the entire series. In an early episode called Pressure, there is a moment where SpongeBob reproduces by budding. He splits off a tiny copy of himself. A little SpongeBob simply grows off of him and detaches. Now, to a casual viewer, that is just a random surreal gag, another impossible thing in a show full of impossible things. But it is not random at all, and this is where Hillenburg, the marine biologist, reaches through the screen. Real sea sponges actually reproduce that way. Budding is a genuine method of asexual reproduction in real sponges, where a new individual grows directly out of the body of the parent and eventually breaks away as its own organism. It is textbook marine biology. The series slipped a completely accurate piece of invertebrate reproduction into a throwaway joke, and almost nobody watching had any idea that the gag was scientifically correct. Put those two things side by side, and something clicks into place. Hillenburg calling SpongeBob almost asexual is not just a line he said in an interview to calm down a controversy. It matches what SpongeBob biologically is. He is a sponge. Real sponges do not have sex the way we picture it. They reproduce by budding and by broadcasting cells into the water. And Hillenburg, the trained marine scientist, built a character whose entire nature is faithful to the actual creature. The asexuality is not a statement about human identity at all. It is accurate zoology, dressed in a tie and square pants. The man knew exactly what a sponge is, and he made his sponge behave, at the deepest level, like a sponge. So why does this fuel theories, if it is just good biology? Because it opens a door that the series then refuses to walk all the way through, and you know by now that an open door is all a theory needs. If SpongeBob can bud off copies of himself, then how many SpongeBobs could there be? Is the SpongeBob we follow the original? Or is he himself a bud, a copy of some earlier sponge, one in a line stretching back? The series raised the mechanism and never addressed the implications, and fans, being fans, ran with it, into questions about whether SpongeBob is even a single continuous individual or just the current sprout of a much older organism. None of that is confirmed. The series did the biologically accurate thing, and then, characteristically, left the philosophical aftermath lying on the floor for anyone who wanted to pick it up. What I find worth holding on to here is how it inverts the usual shape of a SpongeBob theory. Most of what we have covered tonight is fans finding darkness the show may not have intended. This one is the opposite. This is the series being far more precise, far more grounded in real science than anyone gave it credit for, and the strangeness coming not from a hidden horror but from accuracy. SpongeBob reproduces by budding because that is what he is, and Hillenburg, calling him almost asexual, is the creator simply describing his creature correctly. The theory generating weirdness is a byproduct of the series being smarter than it looks, and there is something fitting about that, because it means the strangest facts about SpongeBob are the true ones, the ones you can check in a biology textbook, and the series never had to invent a single conspiracy to be truly bizarre. It just had to be honest about what a sponge is. staying with the strange facts that are actually in the series rather than layered on top of it, here is a small one that opens into a genuine puzzle the writers seem to have created on purpose and then guarded ever since. It is the question of how old SpongeBob is. And the reason it is a puzzle is that the series gave you a specific answer, once, in the fine print, and then spent the rest of its life making sure that answer could not possibly be true. The specific answer is a date. In a couple of early episodes, when SpongeBob's driver's license turns up on screen, you can catch a birth date printed on it. The date is the 14th of July, 1986. Now hold that against the premiere of the show. SpongeBob first aired in 1999. If the character was born in 1986, then when the series began, he would have been about 13 years old. A 13-year-old. Except SpongeBob is not written as a child. He lives alone, in his own house. He holds down a steady job at a restaurant. He drives, or at least he is endlessly, desperately trying to get his license, which is its own long-running joke. He does the taxes, he pays the mortgage on a pineapple, he exists with all the trappings of an adult life. And the series wants you to read him as an adult, a working adult with adult responsibilities, while a license in an early episode silently insists he was born in a year that would make him a young teenager when it all started. And it gets stranger if you carry the math forward, which is the sort of detail that keeps this alive online. A birth date in 1986 means that, sitting here now, SpongeBob would be pushing 40 years old, a middle-aged sponge, still flipping patties, still shrieking with delight over jellyfishing, still unable to hold on to a driver's license, having supposedly been alive for nearly 4 decades. The number simply does not fit the character at any point you try to place it. As a teenager, it is wrong. As a near 40-year-old, it is wrong. There is no age at which SpongeBob makes sense, and that, I think, is not an accident or a continuity error. That is the point. Because here is the thing the show did next, and it is the tell. That birth date got scrubbed. In later appearances, the license and the paperwork stopped committing to it. The specific year faded out of the canon, and SpongeBob drifted back into being ageless, unpin-downable, a character whose age is deliberately left as a blank. And this matches what is known about how Hillenburg approached it. He did not want SpongeBob nailed to a number. He wanted him to exist in a kind of ageless zone, old enough to have a job and a home and the independence that the comedy needs, young enough to have the boundless, unguarded wonder of a child, and crucially, not fixed to either, so that the series never had to grow him up or lock him into a life stage. The 1986 license was a joke detail that slipped in early, and once it threatened to actually define him, it got walked back, because a defined age is a cage. I find this quite elegant as a piece of character design, and it is worth pausing on why it matters beyond trivia. A huge amount of what makes SpongeBob work is that he occupies an impossible middle. If he were clearly a child, the series would be a kids being kids story, and his independence, the house, the job, the license, would make no sense. If he were clearly a grown adult, his innocence, his uncomplicated joy, his total lack of cynicism, would start to read as strange or arrested rather than charming. He has to be both and neither. He has to be an adult by circumstance and a child by spirit, permanently, without the tension ever resolving. And the only way to protect that is to refuse to ever tell you his age. So the series refuses. The one time a number leaked out, it created a contradiction so total that the cleanest fix was to erase the number and let him float free again. This is a different flavor of never denied, and I want to name the distinction. With the nuclear theory, the show never denied something dark that fans proposed. Here, the series planted a fact, the birth date, and then declined to ever confirm it as canon, effectively unsaying its own detail rather than a fan's. It is the series keeping a secret from itself. And the secret is not sinister at all, it is protective. The ambiguity about SpongeBob's age is the same instinct as the ambiguity about the Krabby Patty formula. Both are things the series learned it must never pin down, because pinning them down would collapse something the whole series depends on. The formula must stay unknown to keep the conflict alive. The age must stay unknown to keep the character possible. So if you ever see a confident post declaring that SpongeBob is exactly 39 years old, or exactly this or exactly that, based on the license, you can smile and let it go, because the series itself already decided that number was a mistake and took it back. The honest answer to how old SpongeBob is, the only answer the series will actually stand behind, is that he is however old he needs to be in this episode and no older. a being suspended outside of time in a town where, as we have already seen, time was never really moving anyway. The license said 1986. The series said, on reflection, let us not do that to him. And it let him stay exactly as unaged as the reef he lives on. Now let us move into the part of Bikini Bottom that the show does not just leave ambiguous by accident, but writes as ambiguous on purpose. Because SpongeBob has real ghost stories inside it, canonical supernatural events, and the way the series handles them is a small masterclass in never giving you the answer. The best example, and one of the best loved episodes in the entire series, is the story of the hash-slinging slasher. Here is what actually happens, because this one is fully in the series, and I can tell it to you straight. In an episode called Graveyard Shift, Mr. Krabs decides to keep the Krusty Krab open 24 hours a day, which means SpongeBob and Squidward have to work the night shift, alone, in the empty restaurant, in the dark. And Squidward, tired of SpongeBob's chatter and wanting to torment him a little, invents a ghost story on the spot. He tells SpongeBob about the hash-slinging slasher, a former fry cook at the Krusty Krab who, in the story, cut off his own hand on the grill, replaced it with a rusty spatula, and then was run over by a bus. And Squidward says that on nights like this one, the hash-slinging slasher returns to the restaurant. He makes it up. He invents the whole thing to scare his coworker, and it works. SpongeBob is terrified. And then the episode does something that has stuck with people for over 20 years. The made-up story starts coming true. Squidward, to really twist the knife, lists the signs that will supposedly herald the slasher's arrival. The lights will flicker, and the lights flicker. He says the phone will ring, and there will be no one on the other end, and the phone rings, and there is no one there. He says the bus, the very bus that supposedly killed the slasher, will arrive, and outside, impossibly, at that hour, a bus pulls up. Each thing Squidward invented as a lie in order to frighten SpongeBob happens, one after another, exactly as described. Squidward invented a monster, and the universe of the show began, calmly and precisely, to make the monster real. And a figure does eventually appear, a green, glowing shape connected to the story. And the terror in that restaurant stops being a joke Squidward is playing, and becomes something neither of them can explain. Now, the episode has a comedic release valve at the end, as SpongeBob episodes tend to, and I will not spoil every beat of how it wraps, because the wrap is part of the fun and part of the frustration. But here is the thing that matters for us tonight. The series never actually explains how a story Squidward made up out of thin air proceeded to come true. Squidward pulled the hash-slinging slasher out of nowhere. There was no slasher before Squidward spoke, and yet the signs he invented manifested in reality. That is not a ghost the characters discover. That is a ghost that a character accidentally spoke into existence by lying about it. And the series presents the whole eerie chain of events and then declines to tell you what was really going on. Was it a real haunting that Squidward somehow predicted by pure coincidence? Was reality in Bikini Bottom bending to match whatever story got told inside the Krusty Krab that night? Was any of it real at all? The episode raises every one of those questions and answers none of them cleanly. And this is where the hash-slinging slasher stops being a fun, scary episode and becomes a small piece of evidence for the bigger theories we have been circling all night. Because think about what it implies about the rules of this world. If a made-up ghost story can start coming true simply because someone told it, then reality in Bikini Bottom is not stable. It is suggestible. It responds to belief and to narrative. And that fits disturbingly well with the Purgatory reading, the idea of a place that is not quite real, a dream logic afterlife, where the ordinary laws of cause and effect do not fully apply, and the world reshapes itself around fear and story. In a normal, solid, physical world, you cannot summon a monster by inventing one. In Bikini Bottom, apparently, sometimes you can, and the show shrugs and moves on to the next episode as if nothing metaphysically enormous just happened. I love this episode, and I love it specifically because of what it refuses to do. It refuses to be a normal ghost story, where the ghost turns out to be real all along and was always there. It refuses to be a debunking, where it was all a misunderstanding with a rational explanation. It sits in the exact middle. The story was fake, and the story came true anyway, and that is a stranger and more unsettling idea than either a real ghost or a fake one. It is a haunting with no ghost behind it, a fear that generated its own object. And the series, being a comedy first, gets to have it both ways. playing the whole thing for laughs and scares at once, and never being pinned down to a claim about what its own world actually permits. So where does this sit in the confirmed and denied ledger? It is a rare case where the ambiguity is unmistakably deliberate, written into the structure of the episode rather than left in the gaps between episodes. The show is not accidentally failing to explain the hash-slinging slasher. It is refusing to, on purpose, because the refusal is the horror. And that refusal, multiplied across an entire series, is a big part of why the theory culture around SpongeBob got so rich. When a show is willing to write an event this strange and then walk away from it without an explanation, it teaches its audience that the answers are theirs to build, that the series will hand you the mystery and trust you to sit up at night turning it over. The hash-slinging slasher is a lie that came true and was never accounted for. In almost any other cartoon, that would be a plot hole. Here, it feels like the series telling you, quite deliberately, that in this place the line between a story and the truth was never as solid as you assumed, which, when you think about the entire premise of a video like this one, is almost the series describing itself. The hash-slinging slasher is a ghost the series refuses to explain, but he is not the only spirit in Bikini Bottom, and the other one is far more official, far more established, and he complicates the whole afterlife question in a way that is worth walking through carefully. I am talking about the Flying Dutchman, the ghost pirate who haunts the seas of the series, a recurring character rather than a one-off scare, and someone the series treats as a fully real, fully canonical part of its world. Unlike the slasher, who Squidward invents on the spot, the Flying Dutchman is presented as wholly, permanently real inside the show. He is a green, glowing, floating pirate specter with a booming voice and a temper, and one of his most memorable outings comes in the second season, in an episode called Shanghaied, which is one of the more inventive episodes of that early golden run. He turns up across the series after that, sometimes menacing, sometimes almost comically petty, but always established as an actual ghost, a being who died and now exists in a spectral form and interacts with the living characters as a matter of course. Nobody in Bikini Bottom doubts the Flying Dutchman exists. He is not a legend or a rumor. He is a guy, or the ghost of a guy, who shows up. So why does that matter for the theories we have been threading together all night? The existence of the Flying Dutchman means that ghosts are real inside SpongeBob. Not ambiguous, not maybe, not a story that came true, but flatly, canonically real. There is an afterlife in this universe. Spirits persist. The dead can linger, and they can appear, and they can talk to you. The series established that as a fixed feature of its reality very early, and never took it back. And the moment you accept that ghosts are simply real in Bikini Bottom, a lot of the darker theories get both stronger and stranger at the same time, because you can no longer dismiss the idea of a haunted, death-adjacent world as pure fan projection. The series itself put a working afterlife on the table. This cuts in two directions, and I want to be fair to both. On one hand, it feeds the purgatory and death readings. If spirits and the afterlife are canon, if the barrier between living and dead is thin enough that a ghost pirate can pop into your restaurant, then a theory that says Bikini Bottom itself is some kind of afterlife or in-between place is not fighting the show's logic, it is extending it. The pieces are all present. Ghosts, established. A recurring figure of death and the sea. A world where the dead are just another part of the neighborhood. The purgatory theorist looks at the Flying Dutchman and says, "See, the show already told you death is porous here. I am only asking how far that goes." But on the other hand, and this is the part that the death theories tend to skip over, the Flying Dutchman actually argues against the strongest version of the everyone is already dead reading. Think about it. If everyone in Bikini Bottom were already dead, if the whole town were a purgatory full of souls, then what would it mean for a ghost to appear among them? The horror of the Flying Dutchman only works because the characters he menaces are alive. He is scary because he is dead and they are not, because he represents a threat of death and an afterlife they have not yet entered. A ghost is only frightening to the living, so the series maintaining a clear category of the dead, the Flying Dutchman, spirits, an afterlife you can be sent to, actually implies a clear category of the living, which is everyone else. You cannot have a meaningful ghost in a town of ghosts. The Dutchman's existence silently insists that SpongeBob and his friends are in fact alive, because otherwise there would be nothing special or terrifying about a spirit walking among them. I find that a satisfying little logical knot, because it shows how the same canonical fact can be pulled in opposite directions by different theories, and how a careful look at what a detail actually requires can push back against the reading that first seems to fit it. The presence of a real afterlife makes the world feel death-haunted, which flatters the purgatory idea, but the specific way that afterlife functions, as a fate distinct from ordinary life, works against the idea that ordinary life in Bikini Bottom is secretly death already. Both things are true. The show gave the theorists an afterlife and, in the same gesture, gave the skeptics a reason the main characters are not in it. What the Flying Dutchman really tells us, I think, is something about the texture Hillenburg and his writers were going for, and it is a texture drawn straight from the sea itself. The ocean, in human imagination, has always been full of ghosts. Drowned sailors, phantom ships, the actual centuries-old legend of a spectral vessel called the Flying Dutchman doomed to sail forever, which is a real piece of maritime folklore the series borrowed its ghost pirate from. The sea is where we have always put our stories about the dead who cannot rest, because the sea takes people and does not always give them back. A marine biologist building an ocean world would know that folklore in his bones, and putting a ghost pirate in Bikini Bottom is not a dark conspiracy. It is the series being faithful to the mythology of the ocean, the same way the budding gag was faithful to its biology. The Flying Dutchman is there because the sea has always had a Flying Dutchman. So in the ledger of confirmed and denied, this one is unusual, because it is not really a theory at all. It is established canon that theories feed on. The afterlife in SpongeBob is real and confirmed. What is not confirmed, and what the show leaves wide open, is how big that afterlife is, where its edges are, and whether the cheerful town sitting on a nuclear graveyard is on the living side of the line or somewhere in between. The series gave you a ghost and let you decide how haunted the rest of the water is. And that, once again, is the pattern. A solid, real, verifiable piece, a canonical ghost pirate, and around it, a fog of implication. The series is perfectly content to let you wander in for as long as you like. Up to now, we have mostly been dealing with theories, readings that fans built on top of a show that never quite confirmed or denied them. But there is a whole category of SpongeBob conspiracy that is different, because it is built on something true. There really are SpongeBob episodes that were pulled, episodes that aired, that people saw, and that were then taken away, removed from rotation, scrubbed from streaming, made hard or impossible to watch. And nothing feeds a conspiracy theory like a real, verifiable disappearance. Because once you know for a fact that the series is capable of hiding episodes, every rumor about a hidden episode suddenly has a foothold. So let us walk through the real ones, carefully, and separate what actually happened from the myths that grew around them. And the biggest of the real ones is an episode called Midlife Crustacean. You have already heard me mention this episode once tonight, because it is the one with the infamous line where Mr. Krabs tastes something and reacts as if he recognizes his own flavor, the moment fans cite for the crab meat theory. But that line is not why the episode is banned, and the reason it is banned is a strange and telling story about how standards change over time. Midlife Crustacean first aired back in 2003, during the show's celebrated early run. On the surface, it is a classic premise. Mr. Krabs is feeling old, feeling like life has passed him by, and he decides to recapture his youth by going out for a wild night with SpongeBob and Patrick. It is a midlife crisis episode, which is a completely normal thing for a comedy to do. The problem is how the wild night ends. The climax of the episode is what the characters call a panty raid. SpongeBob, Patrick, and Mr. Krabs break into a house in the middle of the night to steal women's underwear, and the house turns out to belong to Mr. Krabs' own mother. Played in 2003, it was a goofy, slightly risque gag, the kind of mild adult-tinged joke the early seasons slipped in over the kids' heads. But standards did not stay in 2003. Years later, when the culture around what is appropriate for a children's show had shifted, someone at the network took another look at an episode whose entire climax involves grown characters breaking into a stranger's home to steal underwear, and decided it did not belong on the air anymore. And so, at some point around 2018, Midlife Crustacean was pulled, simply removed from rotation, taken off the schedule, and, by the accounts that have circulated since, not brought back. And there is a detail that makes this one stand out from every other pulled episode in the show's history. It appears to be effectively permanent. Networks pull things all the time, temporarily. for all sorts of reasons, and usually the episodes come back. Midlife Crustacean, by the accounts that have been reported, is different. It has been described as the one SpongeBob episode with no plans for it to ever return, the closest thing the series has to a truly, permanently buried installment. Not lost, not secret, everyone knows it exists. It aired for years, but shelved with a finality that the show almost never applies to its own catalog. There is something almost poignant about that, a normal episode from the golden era, beloved for years, containing one of the best-known lines in the whole series, now sitting in a vault, because the joke at its center stopped being acceptable to tell. Now, let me be precise about what this is and what it is not, because this is precisely the sort of real fact that gets twisted into something it is not. Midlife Crustacean is not a lost episode in the creepypasta sense. There is nothing supernatural about it, nothing disturbing hidden in it, no dark secret encoded in the animation. It is a regular comedy episode with a gag that aged badly, removed by a network doing ordinary content review. That is the whole story. It is a story about changing standards, not about hidden horrors. But you can see, I hope, how it becomes rocket fuel for the people who want to believe in hidden horrors. Because the takeaway a conspiracy-minded viewer draws from it is simple and, on its own terms, correct. The series does remove episodes. The series is willing to make an episode disappear. So when someone tells you there is another episode, a darker one they do not want you to see, the existence of Midlife Crustacean makes that claim feel a little more plausible than it should. That is the trap, and it is worth naming clearly so you can step around it. The fact that one episode was pulled for a mild underwear gag does not mean there is a secret episode where something terrible happens. Those are completely different categories of thing. One is a documented, boring, understandable act of network caution. The other is a story people tell. But the human mind does not naturally keep those categories separate. It hears the show hides episodes, and it hears there is a hidden episode, and it lets the true statement lend its credibility to the false one. This is how a lot of conspiracy thinking works, not by inventing evidence out of nothing, but by taking one real, verifiable fact and letting it vouch for a pile of claims that have nothing to do with it. What I find most interesting about Midlife Crustacean, stepping back, is that it is a small monument to how the series aged alongside its audience and its era. This is a series that started in 1999 in a very different television landscape, when a cheeky underwear raid could sit in a children's cartoon and nobody blinked, and it kept running and running, long enough that the ground shifted underneath its own early episodes, long enough that its past became something the present had to manage. Very few shows last long enough to have to disown their own younger self. SpongeBob did. Midlife Crustacean is the clearest example, an episode the series made, aired, loved, and then, decades later, decided it could no longer stand behind. It was never denied in the sense of pretending it did not exist. It was, instead, set down, and the fact that it is the one episode the series reportedly has no intention of ever picking back up gives it a strange kind of weight, the single door in the whole enormous house of Bikini Bottom that got closed and, it seems, locked. Not because of a monster behind it, just because of a joke that the years turned into something the series no longer wanted to make. There is a second pulled episode worth knowing about, and it makes a useful contrast with the first, because it was taken away for a completely different reason, and, crucially, it came back. If Midlife Crustacean is the episode the show retired because the joke aged badly, this one is the episode the series shelved because reality caught up to it at the worst possible moment. It is a much later episode, from the 12th season, and it is called Quarantined Crab. The premise, when it was written, was harmless. There is an outbreak of something called the clam flu, and the Krusty Krab ends up under a health quarantine, with the characters locked inside the restaurant, unable to leave, dealing with a mysterious illness and the paranoia and cabin fever that come with being sealed in together. As a comedy idea, it is solid. A bottle episode about being trapped indoors during a disease scare, the kind of pressure cooker setup that has fueled sitcoms for decades. The writers could not possibly have known what was coming, because the episode was made and slated to air right as the entire world walked into a real pandemic, and suddenly a light-hearted cartoon about a contagious illness, a quarantine, and being locked inside a building to stop the spread of a disease was not light-hearted at all. It was, for a lot of people, a little too close to the thing they were living through every single day. So in 2021, with the real pandemic still shaping daily life, Nickelodeon pulled Quarantined Krab. The reasoning that has been reported is straightforward and, I think, humane. A story about a quarantine and a spreading illness, complete with the fear and confinement that go with it, was judged to be too sensitive to broadcast to children, while families were still living inside exactly that reality. It was not about anything wrong in the episode itself. It was about timing. The episode had done nothing except be finished at the wrong moment in history, and the network decided the kindest and most sensible thing was to hold it back, rather than beam a comedy version of a global trauma into homes that were still in the middle of that trauma. And this is what separates it cleanly from Midlife Crustacean, the thing I want you to hold on to, because these two episodes get confused constantly, and they are not the same at all. Quarantined Krab came back. Once the sharpest edge of the real pandemic had passed, once enough time had gone by that the subject was not raw in the same way, the episode returned. By 2022, it had returned to the air, and before long it was welcomed back into the streaming catalog as well. It was a pause, not a burial. The series pressed pause on it, out of sensitivity to the moment, and when the moment had softened, it pressed play again. That is a completely different act from what happened to Midlife Crustacean, which was shelved because of its content and, by the reports, stayed shelved. One episode was removed because of what it was. The other was removed because of when it was, and once the when had changed, it was welcome back. I am spending time on this distinction because it is the very kind of nuance that conspiracy retellings flatten. In the online version, these two stories tend to blur into a single ominous claim, that SpongeBob has banned episodes, that Nickelodeon hides things, and the specifics that actually explain the removals get lost. But the specifics are the whole point. When you look at the real reasons, there is nothing sinister in either case. One episode featured a gag that stopped being appropriate for kids as standards evolved. The other episode had the bad luck to be about a pandemic on the eve of a real one, and was set aside out of ordinary decency until the timing was less painful. Neither is a hidden horror, neither is a secret the show is desperate to keep. They are two different, very human, very understandable decisions about what to put in front of children and when. But I understand completely why they feed the larger mythology, and this is where I land on the whole subject of pulled episodes. Every one of these real removals teaches the audience the same lesson, that the show's catalog is not fixed, that episodes can vanish and reappear, that there is a hand behind the curtain deciding what you are allowed to see this year versus last year. And once you have absorbed that lesson from the true examples, the false examples, the invented lost episodes, the supposed secret cuts, slot right into the space the true ones opened up. Quarantined Krab is proof that an episode can disappear for a while. The creepypasta then whispers, and what if one disappeared forever? And what if the reason was not sensitivity, but something they could never let you see? The real removals are innocent, but they are the doorway through which the fake ones walk in. So in our running ledger of confirmed and denied, both of these belong firmly in the confirmed and completely explained column. Quarantined Krab, real, pulled for pandemic timing, restored about a year later. Midlife Crustacean, real, pulled for a content gag, apparently kept off the air. Both true, both documented, both boring in the best possible way. Boring meaning explicable, meaning there is no mystery once you know the facts. And I think there is something almost reassuring in that, if you let it be. The best known banned episodes of SpongeBob, the real ones, the ones you can actually verify, turn out to have plain, decent reasons behind them. The network was being careful, that is it. Which makes it all the more striking that the show has, floating around it, a whole other banned episode, one that was never real at all, and that one is where we are headed next. Because no tour of SpongeBob Conspiracies could be honest without walking straight into the most infamous lost episode legend the internet ever produced. And I want to handle it with real care, because it is a piece of fiction that a lot of people came to believe was true. So here we are at the story that everyone was really waiting for, the darkest and most famous SpongeBob legend of them all. And before I say a single word about what it claims, I am going to tell you plainly what it is, because getting this right is the one thing I most need to get right all night. What I am about to describe is fiction. It is a horror story written by an anonymous person on the internet. It is not a real episode. It never aired, it was never made, it was never storyboarded, and the people who actually make SpongeBob have said so, by name, on the record. It is a piece of what the internet calls creepypasta. A scary story dressed up to look like a true account, and its entire craft is the pretense of being real. So we are going to walk through it the way you walk through any campfire tale, knowing from the first step that it is a tale. The legend is usually called Squidward's suicide, and sometimes it goes by the name Red Mist. The story presents itself as a first-hand account from someone who claims to have worked at Nickelodeon, an intern or a low-level animator, brought in to help review episodes. As the tale goes, this person and a few colleagues sat down to watch a rough copy of what was supposedly going to be the Season 4 premiere, an ordinary episode with an ordinary title on the tape. And at first, in the story, it plays like a normal SpongeBob episode. Squidward is trying to give a clarinet concert and playing badly. The crowd is laughing at him, standard setup. But then, according to the legend, the episode starts to go wrong. The narrator describes the animation degrading, the quality slipping into something crude and disturbing. The audience in the episode shown with strange, hyper-realistic, bloodshot eyes. The story claims the episode abandons any plot and becomes a slow, unbearable descent, focusing on Squidward alone, crying, and it builds toward the moment the whole legend is named for, in which the character takes his own life. And laced through all of it, in the telling, is a growling voice and recurring images of real violence, and that red-eyed, red-tinted imagery that gives the Red Mist version its name. Now I am deliberately keeping that summary sparse, and not lingering on the grim specifics, both out of respect for the subject it touches, and because the lurid detail is exactly the part that does not matter, because none of it happened. What matters is understanding why this particular story spread further than any lost episode legend on the entire internet, spawning countless retellings, fake video reconstructions, and imitators, because the answer tells you something real about how these things work even when their content is invented. It works, first, because of the frame. The story is told as a workplace account, from someone claiming to be on the inside, which is the oldest trick in the book for making fiction feel like testimony. It is not, look at this scary thing I made. It is, let me tell you about the day I saw something I was not supposed to see. That framing does an enormous amount of work, because it converts a horror story into a leak, and a leak feels like truth. Second, it works because it attaches itself to a real production fact that we have already spent time on tonight. You now know that SpongeBob really does have pulled episodes, that Midlife Crustacean really was shelved, that the show really is willing to make an installment disappear. The creepypasta feeds on that. It says, you already know they hide episodes, and here is the one they hide hardest. And the true fact lends its weight to the false story, exactly the way I warned you it would. And third, it works because of the choice of Squidward. This is the element I find truly clever about the legend as a piece of horror writing, setting aside that it is a fabrication. Of all the characters to build a story of despair around, Squidward is the one it fits. We talked earlier about how the series structurally requires Squidward to suffer, how his misery is load-bearing, how he can never escape or win because the format will not let him. The creepypasta takes that real, uncomfortable truth about the character, the sense that Squidward is trapped in an existence of unending frustration, and it pushes it to its darkest possible endpoint. It works as horror because it is parasitic on something the series actually does. Squidward really is the saddest figure in Bikini Bottom. The legend just takes that sadness and gives it the darkest conclusion a story can give, and because the sadness underneath is real, the horror on top of it sticks. But now let me do the part this channel exists to do and shut the door firmly, because the people who make SpongeBob have addressed this directly and there is no ambiguity here at all. None of the never-denied fog that hangs over everything else tonight. This one was denied, flatly, by name. A writer on the show, Casey Alexander, publicly called the Squidward suicide story a 100% hoax, not likely fake, not probably not real, a 100% hoax, in those terms. And separately, Vincent Waller, the same executive producer we met when we were talking about the Krabby Patty formula, addressed it as well, and made clear that the scene at the center of the legend was never even in the storyboard, that it simply did not exist at any stage of the show's actual production. These are not anonymous internet denials. These are named people who worked on the series, on the record, telling you the thing did not happen. There was no lost suicide episode. There was no cursed Season 4 premiere. There was a scary story, written by a stranger, dressed in the costume of a leak. I want to be careful and sober about why the firmness of that matters, because this legend is not harmless in the way the drug theory is harmless. It is a story about suicide, presented to a lot of young viewers as a real thing that a beloved show supposedly created, and stories like that can truly disturb the people who half believe them. So it is worth saying without any hedging, because the truth here is not fuzzy. Nickelodeon did not make an episode where Squidward kills himself. No such episode was produced. The named creators have said so directly. If you ever encountered this as a kid and it unsettled you, or if you know someone who did, the reassuring thing is also the true thing. It was fiction the whole time, written by someone who wanted to frighten strangers on a message board, and it succeeded at that and nothing more. There is one fascinating wrinkle to this whole saga though, and it is the thing that pulls it back into the theme of the entire video. So let me end on it. The show, years later, seems to have acknowledged its own most infamous fake. That unsettling image at the center of the legend, the red-eyed version of Squidward, became so widely known, so thoroughly a part of internet culture, that SpongeBob itself appears to have nodded at it, treating the viral fake as something it could wink at, an Easter egg reference to a story it had nothing to do with creating. And I find that a perfect, strange little loop to sit inside. A fan wrote a fake horror episode about Squidward. The show's own staff denied it completely, by name, as a hoax. And then, later, the series reached out and touched the myth anyway, acknowledging the shadow that fans had cast on its own character, folding the fake back into the real thing as a knowing joke. It is the series refusing to pretend the legend does not exist, while never for a second treating it as true. Which is, when you think about it, the healthiest possible way to handle the darkest story ever told about you. Do not hide from it. Do not endorse it. Just let the audience know that you know, and keep going. And that little wink is where we turn next, because the Easter eggs and self-references the series has buried over the years are their own quiet conspiracy, and a much friendlier one. Let me pull us back from the horror and into something lighter, but no less strange, because there is a whole family of SpongeBob mysteries that come not from anything dark, but from the show's own cheerful refusal to obey the rules of its own setting. This is the theory cluster I think of as the physics problem, and it starts with a question that has bugged attentive viewers since the very beginning. How does Sandy breathe? Sandy Cheeks is a squirrel, a land animal, a mammal, from Texas, living at the bottom of the ocean. And the show is completely aware of this, so it gives her a solution. She lives inside a tree dome, a glass bubble full of air, and when she goes outside she wears a helmet full of air, a little glass dome over her head, because she cannot breathe water. That is the rule the series sets for Sandy. She is the one character who needs air, who would drown in the open ocean, and the tree dome and the helmet are how she survives underwater. And honestly, that is a lovely, thoughtful bit of world building, a real acknowledgement that a mammal underwater has a problem the fish do not. Except the moment you accept that rule for Sandy, the entire rest of the series falls apart, and this is where it becomes wonderful. Because if Sandy needs a helmet full of air to survive underwater, then air is a real, distinct thing in this world, separate from the water, necessary for certain kinds of life. Fine, but then why, in that same world, do the fish characters go to the beach? There is a beach in Bikini Bottom, an underwater beach, where the characters sunbathe on the sand and swim in a body of water. Swim, in the water, while already being underwater. There is water within the water, a smaller sea inside the sea, and the characters treat going for a swim in it as a normal thing. And if the fish can drown, which the series sometimes implies, then what exactly is the difference between the water they breathe and the water they swim in? The series never says. It just has an ocean, and inside the ocean, a beach, and inside the beach, more ocean, like a set of nesting dolls that should be impossible. And then there is fire. The characters light fires underwater. They have campfires, they cook on open flames. There are episodes with actual burning fire happening at the bottom of the sea, which cannot happen. Fire needs oxygen and does not burn underwater, and the show knows this is absurd because it once had a character point out how ridiculous it is. So the series is not making a mistake. It is aware that fire underwater is impossible, aware that a squirrel needs air, aware that a beach under the sea makes no sense. And it does all of these things anyway, on purpose, as a kind of running joke about its own reality. The physics of Bikini Bottom are not consistent. They bend to whatever the story needs. Water is breathable for the fish, deadly for the squirrel, swimmable at the beach, and somehow supports open flame, all at once. Now, for most viewers, this is just cartoon logic, and you are not meant to think about it, and that is the correct and healthy way to watch. But you know by now that a world with inconsistent rules is fertile ground for theories like these, and the physics problem has fed one of the more interesting speculative readings, which is that Bikini Bottom is not a real physical place at all, and that its rules are inconsistent because it is not bound by physics in the first place. This connects back to the Purgatory and afterlife readings we walked through earlier, the idea of a dream place, an in-between, a reality that runs on story logic rather than natural law. In a dream, you do not notice that the rules keep changing. A squirrel needs air, and also there is fire, and also there is a beach, and none of it troubles anyone, because the place was never governed by the physics of the waking world to begin with. The physics problem, read that way, stops being sloppy writing and becomes evidence that the setting is somewhere the ordinary laws simply do not reach. I want to be fair though, because there is a much simpler explanation, and it is almost certainly the true one. The inconsistencies exist because SpongeBob is a comedy that prizes the joke over the rulebook every single time. Hillenburg and his writers made a very deliberate choice early on to treat the underwater setting as a flexible stage rather than a rigid simulation. If a gag is funnier with a campfire, there is a campfire, and the ocean can complain about it later. The world is inconsistent because consistency was never the goal, delight was. That is not a flaw, it is a philosophy, and it goes a long way toward explaining why the series feels so free and so surprising. Because you can never be quite sure what the world will allow, and the world itself does not seem to know either. But here is where I land, and it is the part that keeps this from being merely a list of goofs. The physics problem shows you something about how the series trained its audience to think, by building a world that visibly refuses to obey its own rules, and by doing it knowingly, with the occasional wink. SpongeBob taught a generation of viewers that the surface of this show is not the whole of it, that there are seams, that things do not quite add up, and that the not adding up might mean something. That habit of mind, the one that notices the squirrel needs air but the fish light fires, is the exact same habit that notices the town is named after a nuclear test site, that the birth date on the license cannot be right, that Squidward can never win. The series spent decades gently teaching people to look for the crack in the picture, and then it acts surprised, or would if it could, that those same people grew up to find cracks everywhere and to wonder what is behind them. The physics problem is not really a mystery. It is the training ground where SpongeBob taught its audience to be theorists in the first place. If the physics problem is the show accidentally teaching its viewers to look for cracks, then the next thing is the series doing it on purpose. Because SpongeBob has always hidden things for the attentive to find, and this is the friendliest conspiracy of the whole night. It is the one about the Easter eggs, the background jokes, the layers built specifically for the person watching twice. SpongeBob has a long-standing reputation as a show with two channels running at once. There is the loud, bright, simple layer that a small child sees and adores, all color and slapstick and silly voices. And underneath it there is a second layer, drier and stranger, aimed squarely over the child's head at the parent in the room and at the adult that child will one day become. This is not a fan theory, it is a widely acknowledged feature of how the series was written, especially in the celebrated early seasons. The writers loaded the frames with jokes that only make sense if you have lived a little, background gags you have to freeze the picture to catch, signs and labels and throwaway details that reward the eye that lingers. A huge amount of the affection adults have for SpongeBob comes from rewatching it and discovering that it was never only a kids' show, that a whole tier of the humor was waiting patiently for them to be old enough to get it. And this is where the marine biology comes back, because some of the most rewarding hidden details are not jokes at all, they are the real science we talked about earlier, folded softly into the background by a creator who could not help himself. The budding gag that is accurate sponge reproduction, the genuine sea creatures tucked into crowd scenes, the behaviors and body plans that match real invertebrates, if you happen to know what you are looking at. Hillenburg built a show that rewards a marine biologist and a film student and a tired parent, all differently, each finding their own hidden layer, and that density does much to explain why the series generates theories the way a rich soil generates growth. When a show is truly packed with intentional hidden meaning, real Easter eggs the creators actually planted, it trains you, correctly, to expect that the hidden things are there. And once you are trained to find the real hidden things, you keep hunting even in places where the hidden thing is not real. That, I think, is the honest link between the friendly conspiracy and all the darker ones. The treasure hunt is real. The series really did bury treasure. The adult jokes are real. The background gags are real. The accurate biology is real. The self-aware winks like the nod to its own creepypasta ghost are real. So the instinct to dig is not paranoia, it is a response to a show that genuinely rewarded digging. The problem, if you can even call it a problem, is that the same instinct that finds the real buried joke also finds the pattern that was never buried, the 7 deadly sins that were never encoded, the drug chart that was never drawn. The series taught people to be treasure hunters, and treasure hunters, by their nature, will occasionally dig up a rock and swear it is gold. But you cannot really blame them, because the beach they are digging on does actually have gold in it. The series put it there. Here is the opinion I will plant on this one, because it is the part almost nobody says out loud. I think the reason SpongeBob, of all the cartoons of its era, became the great theory-generating machine of the internet is not that it is secretly the darkest show. It is that it is secretly the densest show. It has more real layers than its competitors, more intentional hidden material, more moments where a knowing adult mind was clearly at work behind a children's gag. Other cartoons from the same years are perfectly good and generate almost no theories, because there is nothing under the surface to find. SpongeBob generates endless theories because there really is something under the surface, again and again. And once an audience learns that lesson often enough with the real Easter eggs, they will apply it to everything, including the places where the surface is all there is. The conspiracy culture around SpongeBob is a monument, in a strange way, to how much care went into it. You do not build a mythology this large around a shallow thing. You build it around something that kept rewarding the people who looked closer, until looking closer became a habit that outran the evidence. So in the ledger, the Easter eggs are the one entry that is confirmed, on the record, and endorsed, because the series is proud of them. It hid things on purpose, and it wants you to find them. The only theory here is the one the viewers invented, which is that, if some of the hidden things are real, all of the hidden things must be real. And that leap is where the friendly conspiracy tips over into the wilder ones. But the base of it, the buried treasure, is true. And I find that a warm note to rest on before we get to the harder subject of what happened to the series, and to its creator, and to the long argument fans have been having for 20 years about whether the SpongeBob you loved is even the same SpongeBob that is still on the air today. This next one is the most down-to-earth of all the conspiracies we will cover, because it is not about the fiction at all. It is about the show itself, the business of it, and the memory of the man who made it. And it is the one where I most want to be measured, because it touches a real person who is gone, and it is easy to be careless with a story like this. It is the conspiracy that the SpongeBob spin-offs exist against Stephen Hillenburg's wishes. Let me set the facts we can actually stand on first. Stephen Hillenburg died on the 26th of November, 2018, at the age of 57, from complications of ALS, the disease also known as motor neuron disease, which he had been diagnosed with the year before, in early 2017. He had stepped back from the day-to-day running of the series years earlier and then returned to it, and by the time of his death, SpongeBob was already one of the most successful entertainment properties on the planet. And then, in the years right after he died, Nickelodeon expanded it. Spin-off shows appeared, series built around the younger versions of the characters and around Patrick specifically, along with more films, including a movie centered on Plankton that arrived years later. The SpongeBob universe grew, and grew fastest, in the period after its creator was no longer there to guide it. You can see how that timing alone generates suspicion. A beloved creator dies, and almost immediately the studio starts spinning his creation off into new shows he had no hand in. It looks, on the surface, like the very thing a grieving fanbase would recoil from, the corporation strip mining the work of a man who could no longer object. And the theory hardens around a specific claim, which is that Hillenburg was fundamentally opposed to spin-offs, that he wanted SpongeBob to be SpongeBob and nothing else, and that everything built out of it after his death is a betrayal of his explicit wishes. There is a piece of real history that gives this claim some grip, because it is reported that years earlier, back around 2003, Hillenburg did decline or resist an idea for a more adult-oriented SpongeBob spin-off pitched for another network. So there is a documented instance of him saying no to a spin-off concept, and the theory takes that and extends it into a blanket principle, that he was against all of them, always. But here is where I have to slow the theory down, because the people closest to the production have pushed back on the blanket version, and their account matters. Vincent Waller, the executive producer whose name has come up several times tonight, has spoken about this, and his account is that Hillenburg was actually aware of the spin-off concepts, the ones about the characters' younger years and about Patrick, and that he approved of the general direction of them in their early stages. Not that he was blindsided, not that they were forced through over his objection, but that he knew and gave his blessing to the direction before he passed. If that account is accurate, and it comes from someone who was in the room, then the clean story of a betrayed creator falls apart. It becomes, instead, a much more ordinary and less sinister thing, a creator near the end of his life, signing off on where his creation would go next. So what is the honest verdict here, in a video whose whole spine is the difference between confirmed and denied and disputed? This one is truly disputed, and I am not going to pretend it is settled in either direction, because it is not. On one side there is a real, documented instance of Hillenburg resisting a spin-off idea years before, which the theory leans on. On the other side there is a named producer stating that Hillenburg knew about and approved the direction of the actual spin-offs that got made. Both of those things are on the record, and they point different ways, and the truth is probably more complicated and more human than either the betrayal story or the tidy blessing story. People's views change. A man might resist one specific idea in one specific year and feel differently about different ideas near the end of his life. The theory takes a genuine ambiguity and flattens it into an accusation, and the accusation is not supported by the fuller account. So I would file this one firmly under disputed, leaning against the strong version. And I would be careful, as I hope I have been, not to turn a real man's legacy into a villain story we cannot actually prove. What I do feel comfortable saying, because it is not speculation, is the thing underneath the whole argument, which is grief. The reason this theory has such emotional force, the reason people want to believe the spin-offs are a betrayal, is that they loved Hillenburg's SpongeBob, and they lost the person who made it, and a world that keeps producing more SpongeBob without him in it can feel like a world that did not stop to mourn. The theory is, in a way, a form of loyalty. It is fans wanting to protect a dead man from a machine that outlived him. I understand that impulse completely, and I think it is worth honoring even where the facts do not support the specific charge. Hillenburg was a marine biologist who loved the ocean and made something out of that love that will outlast all of us. The desire to guard that, to make sure the thing he built is not carelessly handled now that he cannot speak for it, is a good and human desire. It just is not the same thing as a proven conspiracy, and I owe you the difference. What is true is that he is gone, that the series goes on, and that the question of what he would have wanted is now one only the living can argue about, which is its own quiet kind of sadness. There is one more belief I want to walk through before we draw all of this together, and it is not a supernatural theory or a hidden meaning theory. It is a theory about the show itself, about its own history, and it is held so widely and so passionately by longtime fans that it functions like a conspiracy, even though it is really an argument about quality and authorship. It is the belief in the golden age, the conviction that there is a real, sharp line in the history of SpongeBob, and that the SpongeBob before that line and the SpongeBob after it are, in some deep sense, not the same show. If you spend any time in the fan communities, you will run into this constantly. There is a widely shared feeling that the earliest seasons, the ones from the show's first years around the turn of the millennium up to its first feature film, represent a kind of untouchable peak, and that something changed afterward. Fans point to the first SpongeBob movie, the one released in 2004, as the natural summit and, in a sense, the natural ending. The movie has the feel of a finale. It brings SpongeBob's arc to a genuine emotional conclusion. It lets him prove himself. It wraps the story with a sense of completeness that a normal episode never reaches. And it is often noted that Hillenburg himself stepped back from running the series around that time, moving away from the daily helm, before eventually returning years later. So the fan narrative writes itself. The real SpongeBob, the pure SpongeBob, the one its creator personally shepherded, ended with that movie. Everything after is something else, a continuation made by other hands, brighter and louder and, to the believers, missing some essential ingredient the early years had. Let me be straight about how much of this is fact and how much is feeling, because it matters. It is a fact that fans draw this line, and draw it hard, and that the pre-movie seasons enjoy a reverence the later ones struggle to match. It is a fact that Hillenburg's direct involvement changed over the years, stepping back and later coming back. What is not a fact what is interpretation, is the claim that the later show is worse, or that it betrays the original, because that is a judgment, and judgments are not the same as evidence. Plenty of people love the later seasons. Plenty of children discovering the show today have no idea there is supposed to be a golden age they missed, and they laugh just as hard as anyone did in 1999. The golden age is real, as a fan consensus, and unprovable as an objective truth, and both of those things can sit together. But here is why I wanted to end the tour on this particular belief. Because it reveals the machinery underneath every single theory we have covered tonight, and it explains why SpongeBob specifically became scripture. When people believe a work had a pure early period and then fell from grace, what they are really expressing is a relationship with an author. The Golden Age theory is, at its core, about Hillenburg. It says there was a time when one specific mind was fully present in this thing, and you could feel that presence in every frame, and then that presence receded, and the thing kept going without the soul that animated it. And that is exactly the feeling that turns a television show into a sacred text. Because once you believe there was an author with intentions, a guiding mind that meant things, you start reading the work for those intentions. You start treating the early episodes as canon in the religious sense, as revealed material from the source, full of meaning the later material lacks. You start hunting for what the author encoded. Every theory in this video, the nuclear origin, the sins, the ages, and the ghosts, is downstream of that one conviction, that there was a mind behind this that meant something, and that if we look closely enough we can recover what it meant. And then the author died, and this is the part that changes everything, and I say it with care because it is the emotional center of the whole subject. When a creator is alive, the meaning of their work is still, in a sense, open, because they can always speak, always clarify, always deny. Hillenburg could have, at any point, ended half the theories in this video with a sentence. He mostly chose not to. And then, in 2018, he lost the ability to ever choose again. The moment a creator dies, their work closes and hardens into something fixed, and it passes entirely into the hands of the people who receive it. There is no longer anyone who can say what it really meant. There is only the work, sitting there, silent, and the endless human need to know what is behind it. That is the exact condition under which scripture forms: a fixed text, a vanished author, and a community left to interpret. SpongeBob became a theory machine not in spite of Hillenburg's death, but partly because of it, because his silence became permanent, and permanent silence is the loudest invitation there is to fill it in. So the Golden Age belief, which looks like the least mystical theory of the bunch, is actually the key to all the others. It is fans grieving an author and canonizing the period when they felt him most present. And once you have canonized a text and lost its author, you will read that text forever, looking for the meanings he left behind and the ones you need him to have left behind, unable ever to be told for certain which is which. Which brings us, at last, all the way back to the promise in the title, and to the strange, specific reason all of these theories share the same shape. Before we close the whole thing out, I want to spend time on a reading that is not about the setting or the afterlife or a hidden episode, but about a single character, and about the possibility that the show has been softly asking you to root for the wrong person this entire time. This is the argument that Mr. Krabs is the real villain of SpongeBob, and that Plankton, the character the series frames as the bad guy, is closer to a sympathetic figure than anyone wants to admit. This one lives in the interpretation register, so I will mark it clearly as a reading rather than a fact. But it is a reading the series gives you a startling amount of material for. Start with what the series establishes about Mr. Krabs, because we do not have to speculate about his defining trait. The series is completely open about it. Mr. Krabs loves money above nearly everything else. His greed is not a subtle undercurrent. It is his entire comedic engine, stated and restated in episode after episode, and for the most part the series plays that greed for laughs. A lovable old skinflint routine. The boss who is cheap and money mad, but ultimately part of the family. But the argument here is that if you stop laughing for a second and actually watch what his greed makes him do, the lovable framing starts to crack. Because his love of money is repeatedly shown to override his care for the people around him, including SpongeBob, the most loyal and devoted employee any business has ever had. Over the run of the series, Mr. Krabs is willing to put SpongeBob in danger, to work him to exhaustion, to value the contents of the cash register over the well-being of the person who fills it. Read without the laugh track. That is not an eccentric uncle. That is an employer who exploits a worker so trusting and so happy that he does not even notice he is being exploited. And this is where the reading turns truly uncomfortable, because it reframes the central relationship of the show. SpongeBob's greatest quality, the pure and total love he brings to his job, is also the thing that makes him the perfect victim of a man like Mr. Krabs. SpongeBob will do anything for the Krusty Krab, will work any hours, will never ask for more, will treat flipping patties as the highest calling in life. To a decent boss, that devotion is a gift to be honored. To a boss ruled by greed, it is a resource to be strip-mined. The theory says the warmth we feel watching SpongeBob adore his job has a shadow, which is that his adoration is precisely what allows him to be used. And the series, characteristically, never makes you sit with that. It keeps the tone light, keeps Mr. Krabs lovable, and lets the darker implication live in the space just underneath, available to anyone who looks, but never forced on anyone who does not. Now turn to Plankton, the designated villain, and run him through the same reconsidering lens. What does Plankton actually want? He wants the formula, yes, but why? Because he runs a competing restaurant, the Chum Bucket, that fails, endlessly, humiliatingly, while the Krusty Krab thrives across the street. Plankton is a small, struggling business owner who cannot catch a break, whose food nobody wants, who watches his rival succeed year after year, while he sits in an empty restaurant with the one person, or the one computer, who loves him. And the series asks you to see him as evil for wanting what his competitor has. But strip the framing away, and Plankton is something much more pitiable than villainous. He is a failure who cannot accept his failure, driven half-mad by proximity to a success he cannot reach. His schemes are ridiculous and doomed, and there is something almost tragic in how badly he wants to matter, how completely his life has narrowed to a single obsession with a burger he will never get to make. And then there is Karen, his computer wife, and the detail that, for me, tips Plankton from antagonist into something sadder. Plankton, the villain, is a character in a committed relationship, someone who goes home to a partner, who has a domestic life, however strange. The great money-loving hero of the show, Mr. Krabs, is defined by his attachment to a cash register. So the series gives its designated bad guy a marriage, and gives its lovable boss a love affair with currency. And if you swapped the framing, if the music cues and the narrative sympathy pointed the other way, you could tell the exact same events as the story of a lonely, striving little underdog, tormented by a rich, greedy tyrant across the street, who exploits a naive employee to keep his empire running. Same events, opposite heroes. The series chose which one to score as sympathetic, and the choice is so consistent that most viewers never notice it was a choice at all. Let me be exact about what I am and am not claiming, because this is interpretation, and I promise to keep the registers honest. I am not telling you the writers secretly intended Mr. Krabs as a villain and Plankton as a hero. There is no confirmation of that, and the series plainly loves Mr. Krabs and plainly plays Plankton as an antagonist. What I am saying is that the raw material of the series, the actual established facts of who these characters are and what they do, supports a darker reading so easily that the reading almost assembles itself, and that the series has never done anything to close it off. It never has a reckoning where Mr. Krabs faces what his greed costs the people who love him. It never lets Plankton's pathos fully land and redeem him. It keeps both characters suspended in their comic roles forever, which means the darker version stays permanently available underneath, never confirmed, never denied, waiting for the viewer who grows up and watches again with different eyes. And that, more than any ghost or any bomb, might be the most subversive thing the series ever did, hiding a story about exploitation and loneliness inside the story of a happy little restaurant, and trusting that you would only find it when you were old enough to recognize it. We have walked through a lot of water tonight, from a real nuclear atoll to a fake Lost episode to a boss who might be a villain, and before I gather it all into a final verdict, I want to step back and ask the question underneath the whole video, the one I find more interesting than any single theory. Why this show? Of all the cartoons that a generation grew up on, why did SpongeBob become the one the internet cannot stop excavating? Why are there endless iceberg videos ranking its mysteries from the well-known to the obscure? Endless threads, endless late-night deep dives like this one. Other shows were just as popular. Other shows ran just as long. And yet SpongeBob, more than almost any of them, became a text people treat like an ancient scripture buried with secrets. I have hinted at pieces of the answer along the way, and now I want to put them together. Part of it, we have already established, is density. This is a show with real hidden layers. Real Easter eggs, real accurate biology, real adult humor tucked under the childish surface, made by a marine scientist who could not stop smuggling the actual ocean into his jokes. A show that truly rewards close looking will always breed people who look closely. But density alone does not explain it, because plenty of dense shows do not generate this. There is a second ingredient, and it is the surreal quality of the thing. The fact that Bikini Bottom is a place where the rules visibly bend, where a squirrel needs air, and a fire burns underwater, and a made-up ghost comes true, where the logic is dreamlike enough that almost any strange reading can find a foothold. Density gives you clues to find. Surrealism gives you room to imagine clues that were never there. Put those two together, a show packed with real secrets, and loose enough to seem packed with even more, and you have the perfect engine for theory. But there is a third ingredient, and it is the one I think matters most, and it is not about the show at all. It is about us, the people watching. SpongeBob is, for an enormous number of people, tied to the safest and warmest part of their own history, to being small, to Saturday mornings, to a time before the world got heavy. And there is a particular thing the adult mind does with the artifacts of its own childhood. It goes back to them looking for depth, because it needs the things it loved as a child to have been worthy of that love. Nobody wants to believe the series that shaped them was only a silly cartoon about a sponge. So we return to it as adults and we read it for meaning, for darkness, for hidden sophistication. Partly because the series supports it, and partly because we need it to be there. The theories are, in a sense, a love letter written backward. A way of saying, this thing that made me happy was secretly profound, so my happiness was not childish, it was perceptive. That is a deeply human impulse, and I do not think there is anything wrong with it. But it is worth seeing clearly, because it explains why the theories run darker than the series itself ever does. The series is sweet, the theories are haunted, and the gap between them is the gap between what a thing was and what we, grown up and a little sadder, need it to have been. And this is where I think the format you are listening to right now, the long, calm, late-night deep dive, connects to the whole phenomenon, because it is the same impulse in a gentler key. When you put on a video like this to fall asleep, you are doing a version of what the theorists are doing. You are returning to something safe and turning it over slowly in the dark, letting a familiar world hold you while your mind drifts. The theories and the sleep video come from the same root, the desire to be back inside Bikini Bottom, to let it be bigger and stranger and more full of meaning than it needs to be, because being inside it feels good. There is nothing to solve here, not really. The pleasure was never in the answers, it was in the turning over, in the company of a world you have loved for a long time, in the low voice walking you through its secrets while you let go of the day. So when people ask why SpongeBob, of all shows, I think the truest answer is that it happened to be the show sitting at the exact intersection of three things: a creator dense and careful enough to fill it with real hidden material, a style surreal enough to imply infinitely more, and a place in the hearts of its audience deep enough that they would spend their adult lives coming back to look. Take away any one of those and the theory culture does not form. A dense show with no emotional hold gets studied and forgotten. A beloved show with no hidden depth gets remembered fondly and left alone. A surreal show that no one loves gets dismissed. SpongeBob got all three at once, and that is a kind of lightning that does not strike often. A children's cartoon that became, without ever meaning to, one of the most interpreted texts of its generation. Not because it was the darkest thing on television, because it was the best-loved thing that also happened to be deep enough and strange enough to hold everything its audience would eventually pour into it. That is the real conspiracy, if you want one. Not that the series is hiding a nuclear apocalypse or a dead Squidward or a secret about the burgers. The real conspiracy is that a silly show about a sponge slowly became a mirror, and the things people find in it, the darkness, the death, the exploitation, the loneliness underneath the color, are at least partly the things they brought with them. The series holds up beautifully to all of it, but it never asked to be read this way. It just refused, again and again, to stop us. And that refusal, that endless gentle openness, is what we are really talking about when we say it never told us no. There is one last thing I want to turn over with you, before we drift toward the end, and it is the word sitting right in the title of this whole video: denied. Because across everything we have covered, one pattern has repeated so many times that it stops looking like an accident and starts looking like a philosophy. The show, its writers, its creator, almost never deny anything. They confirm a little, here and there. They redirect gently. But the flat, final, no, that is not true denial, the kind that would kill a theory dead, almost never comes. And I think that is worth understanding not as neglect, but as a choice. Because a story gains something real by refusing to close its own doors. And SpongeBob may be the purest example of that lesson in modern television. Think about what a denial actually costs. The moment a show tells you what something definitely is, it also tells you everything it definitely is not. And in that instant, 1,000 possibilities collapse into one fact. And facts, however satisfying, are smaller than possibilities. If the series had ever stated, on the record, exactly what is in a Krabby Patty, the decades-long war between crabs and plankton would deflate, the mystery box would empty, and one of the show's best engines would stop turning. If it had ever fixed SpongeBob's age, it would have traded an infinitely flexible character for a single rigid one. If it had ever explained the hash-slinging slasher, the eeriest episode in the catalog would become an ordinary one. Every denial is a door slammed, and a slammed door is a place the imagination can no longer go. The series seems to have understood, whether by instinct or by design, that its ambiguities were not gaps to be filled, but assets to be protected, and so it protected them, the only way you can protect a mystery, by keeping its mouth shut. And this is where the nuclear theory and the creepypasta sit, at the two opposite ends of a single spectrum, and looking at them together tells you exactly where the line falls. On one end, the nuclear origin, a theory the show never denied and a writer eventually half confirmed. And notice, that is a theory the series was happy to leave open, because it adds depth, it adds resonance, it makes the sunny surface hum with something darker and richer underneath, and it costs the series nothing to let people believe it. On the other end, the Squidward suicide legend, and there, and only there, the series and its staff did issue a flat, named, unambiguous denial, because that story was not an asset, it was a genuine harm, a piece of fiction that disturbed real people and attached something ugly to a beloved character. So the pattern is not that the series never denies anything. The pattern is that the series denies exactly the things that would hurt it or its audience to leave standing, and leaves everything else gloriously, deliberately open. The nuclear apocalypse, the sins, the ghosts, the ages, the hidden meanings, all left open, because open is where the magic lives. The suicide hoax, shut down hard, because some doors should be closed. There is a second, subtler thing the series gets out of all this silence, and it is worth naming because it is easy to miss. By never confirming and rarely denying, the series silently turns its audience into co-authors, and that is a powerful thing to do to a fan base. When a work hands you the answers, you are a spectator. You receive what you are given and you are done. But when a work withholds them, when it lays out the evidence and then declines to tell you what it adds up to, it invites you to do the last step yourself, and the last step is where ownership happens. The fan who worked out the nuclear connection, who lined up the birthdate math, who noticed Squidward can never win, feels a kind of authorship over that reading, feels that they found it, and a thing you found yourself is a thing you never let go of. That is why these theories are held with such loyalty and passion, far more than any official fact ever inspires. The series gave its viewers the raw material and the freedom, and in that freedom they built something that feels like theirs, and people defend what feels like theirs. A denial would have taken that away. It would have turned every theorist back into a spectator. So the series, wisely, kept quiet, and let a generation feel like they were writing the deeper story alongside it, which, in the only way that finally matters, they were. That is a more sophisticated relationship with mystery than most shows ever manage. And I think it is the deepest reason SpongeBob rewards this kind of attention. It is not that the writers plotted out a secret dark meaning and hid it. It is that they cultivated a garden of open questions, and then had the discipline, across 25 years and hundreds of episodes and an entire change of creative generations, to keep from trampling their own flowers. Ambiguity is fragile. It only takes one careless interview, one over-explaining episode, one writer wanting to seem clever, to wreck a mystery that took years to grow. SpongeBob mostly avoided that. It kept its secrets by having no secrets, by simply declining to answer, again and again, until the not answering became a kind of invitation, until an entire culture of interpretation grew up in the space the show left empty on purpose. So when I say the series never denied it, I do not mean the series is hiding something. I mean the series made a quiet, consistent, almost artistic decision to remain open, to be a place you could keep asking questions and never be turned away. And there is something moving in that, because it means the series trusts you. It hands you a world full of loose threads and unanswered questions, and lets you make of them whatever your life has prepared you to make. A child makes nothing of them and just laughs. A marine biologist finds accurate creatures. A grieving adult finds death and permanence. A tired person at midnight finds a warm place to fall asleep. The series holds all of those readings at once, and refuses to tell any of them they are wrong. That is not evasion. That is generosity. The same generosity we noticed all the way back at the beginning. A world with the doors left open and the lights left on, waiting for whoever wants to wander in and look around. The theories are what we build in that open space. The series just keeps the space open, and never, ever tells us to leave. Before the very end, I want to circle all the way back to the water we started in, because there is a piece of this that is not a theory at all, that no writer has to confirm or deny, and that I think is the saddest and most important fact in the whole night, and it deserves to be spoken plainly before we close. It is the real people of Bikini Atoll, and what actually happened to them, and what it means that a beloved cartoon carries their name. We talked at the beginning about the 23 nuclear tests, about the sunken fleet and the coral that grew back, and it is easy, when you are tracing a fun connection to a children's show, to let the human part slide out of focus. So let me hold it in focus for a moment. The people who lived on Bikini were not an abstraction. They were a community with generations of history on those islands, a whole way of life built around that reef and that lagoon, and they were asked to leave their home so that it could be used as a place to detonate weapons, more destructive than any built before. They were told it would be temporary, that it served a greater good, and then the tests poisoned the land so thoroughly, drove the radiation so deep into the soil, that going home safely became something that receded further and further out of reach with every passing decade. Their descendants inherited an exile, a home that still exists, that you can see on a map, that you can even dive around, but that they cannot simply return to and live on the way their grandparents did. It is one of the quieter tragedies of the atomic age, a people who gave up their islands for a promise and never got the islands back. And here is what I keep turning over, and it is not an accusation, because I do not think anyone involved in the cartoon meant any harm. The show is called SpongeBob SquarePants, and its setting, the cheerful town at the center of it all, is named Bikini Bottom, after Bikini Atoll, after a real place that carries one of the heaviest histories of displacement and contamination on the planet. A generation of children learned the word bikini from a happy yellow sponge, with no idea that the word points to a real reef where real families lost their home to the bomb. There is something almost unbearably strange in that, when you sit with it. The brightest, most innocent thing many of us encountered as children is named after one of the darker things adults did in the last century, and almost nobody making the connection out loud. Now, I do not read this as the series being cruel or careless, and I want to be fair, because the naming was never mockery. If anything, given that the creator was a marine biologist who knew that region and its history, I suspect the choice carried at least some awareness, some quiet acknowledgement of the ocean's real story, folded into a fantasy about it. But awareness or not, the fact stands on its own, and it does not need a theory to make it resonate. The single most haunting thing about the world of SpongeBob is not the nuclear mutation theory or the Purgatory reading, or any of the elaborate structures fans have built. It is the plain, documented, untheorized truth that the series is named for a place where people were harmed and never fully made whole. No writer has to confirm that. No creepypasta has to invent it. It is simply true, and it has been true the entire time, sitting underneath the theme song and the laughter, the realest dark thing in the whole story, and the one almost nobody talks about. I bring this up here, near the end, because I think it reframes the entire exercise of theorizing in a way that is worth carrying with you as you drift off. All night we have been chasing hidden darkness, radiation and death and suicide and exploitation, most of it invented, layered onto a show by an audience hungry for depth. And the whole time, the actual darkness was never hidden at all. It was in the name. It was the one piece of real-world tragedy the show truly rests on, and it required no decoding, no freeze frames, no forum threads, just a willingness to look up what Bikini Atoll actually was. There is a lesson in that about where real darkness tends to live, not in the elaborate secret, but in the plain fact we walk past because it is too familiar to examine. The theories are a game, a warm and clever game, and I love the game. But the reef beneath the game is real, and the people who lost it are real. And the least we can do, as we enjoy the bright, strange world built on top of their story, is to know whose water we are swimming in. The series never denied that either. It just never expected us to notice, and mostly, we never did. So let us come up slowly, out of the deep water, and let the whole night settle. We started on a real reef in the Pacific, with real bombs and real families, and coral that grew back over a drowned fleet. And from there, we followed the theories outward like ripples. The town built on a nuclear test site, half confirmed by a writer who said the world upstairs is gone. The burger whose secret was denied in one direction and contradicted in another, and never actually revealed. The cast read as sins, as disorders, as drugs, as soldiers. None of it designed in, all of it left standing. The town read as an afterlife. The loop read as damnation. The ghost story that came true. The ghost pirate who proves the living are alive. The sponge who reproduces like a real sponge and has no fixed age because his creator refused to give him one. The two real banned episodes, one shelved for a joke that aged badly, one paused because reality got too close and then welcomed back. The fake Lost episode, denied by name, and the series that later winked at its own most infamous lie, the boss who might be the villain, the spin-offs and the grief, and under all of it, the plain and unhidden truth of the name itself. And if you noticed one thing threading through every single piece of it, you noticed the thing the title promised. The show almost never said no. It confirmed a little, it redirected gently, it denied only the one story that could actually wound someone, and everything else it left open, on purpose, with the lights on and the door unlatched. That is the whole secret, if there even is one. Not a hidden meaning, but a habit of never closing the meaning off. A generosity so consistent it built a mythology. I have loved sitting in this with you, because SpongeBob is a strange and singular thing in the culture, and I do not think we say that plainly enough. It is a show a marine biologist made out of his love for the ocean, that became one of the great commercial successes its medium has ever produced, that a generation carries around inside them like a warm room they can always go back to. It made children laugh without ever talking down to them, and it hid enough real thought under the color that those same children could return as adults and find it waiting, deeper than they remembered. Very few things made for the very young hold up when you are tired and grown and a little worn by the world. This one does. It holds up at midnight. It holds up when you cannot sleep. It holds up when you have learned enough about the actual ocean and the actual history to see the shadows the bright surface floats on, and somehow the brightness is not ruined by the shadows, it is deepened by them. That, in the end, is what I think the theories are really about, and why people like us spend hours in the dark turning them over. Not because we believe Bikini Bottom is literally a radioactive purgatory full of dead souls, but because loving something for a long time makes you want to understand it, and a thing worth loving for a long time turns out to have more inside it than you can ever finish understanding. The theories are the shape our affection takes when it grows up. They are a way of staying in the water a little longer. And the show, wonderful and patient and open as it has always been, just lets us stay, and never tells us the water is only water. So wherever you are right now, however heavy the day was, I hope this was a good place to set it down. I hope the reef and the town and the little yellow sponge made a soft enough space for you to drift off in. There is nothing left to solve tonight. The burger will keep its secret. Squidward will play his clarinet badly forever, and there is a strange comfort in that, in a world where nothing has to be resolved because nothing was ever really allowed to change. A place that will be exactly the same tomorrow and the day after, waiting for you whenever you want to come back. You do not have to keep your eyes open. You do not have to remember any of the theories. Let them dissolve like everything else at the edge of sleep. The series will still be there in the morning, sitting on its reef, never denying anything, holding the door open. Thank you for spending this long, quiet stretch of the night with me, and thank you for letting Krabby be the voice that walked you down into it. If you drifted off somewhere in the middle, that is the highest compliment you can pay a video like this, and you can always start it again another night and catch the parts you missed. Rest well, let your breathing slow, let the light of the surface fade up above you, and let the warm, strange water of Bikini Bottom hold you the rest of the way down. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.